In the blink of an eye, Eren had charged in and his two swords were stained with the blood of the rebels. Before they could even scream, they breathed their last. Eren landed on the ground, his expressionless eyes fixed and his sword still gleaming with a cold light. Del Joffrey, witnessing his comrades being taken down in an instant, fell into disbelief as they fell one after another, exclaiming, "What is happening?" Before he could finish his sentence, Eren raised his sword, preparing to strike him. Del Joffrey was so terrified that he fell backward onto the ground. Eren decisively swung his sword down, but the sound of metal clashing rang out piercingly. Eren looked up, at a loss for words at the sight before him. Joseph Breeden, who once belonged to Eren's army, was now bracing himself to block Eren's sword for the bandit leader, Del Joffrey. Luna exclaimed in astonishment, "What?" She wanted to step forward to confront the situation, but was stopped by soldiers in front of her, fearing for her safety. At that moment, Joseph Breeden turned back and said with a smile to Del Joffrey, "Let me give you a hand, dear bandit leader." Del Joffrey, still shaken, stammered, "You? Who the hell are you?" Eren and Joseph Breeden simultaneously drew their swords and took a few steps back. Luna rushed down from her horse, coming closer to Eren. Joseph Breeden turned to Del Joffrey, who was standing right next to him, and said, "I am the chief knight of the Blood Knight Order of Count Serid, Joseph Breeden." At this point, he made a sinister face and continued, emphasizing each word to the person next to him. "It seems you want to kill this brat too, so I would be more than happy to lend you a hand." Eren understood Joseph Breeden's intent, gave a faint smile, and said nothing. Luna hugged Eren's arm and loudly questioned Joseph Breeden. "Breeden, what the hell is going on?" Eren lowered his sword to avoid harming the girl and quietly said, "Step back." Joseph Breeden extended his hand, smiled at Luna, and arrogantly said, "Miss, please do not be deceived by that useless brat. He doesn't even have anything to deserve being a count. I am the one who is suitable for you, not that piece of trash." The fool Del Joffrey was finally able to digest what happened. He turned his head and interrupted Joseph Breeden. "Wait a minute, a traitor?" Del Joffrey picked up the sword from the ground and said with satisfaction, "Very good." Then he raised his sword and leaped towards Eren, loudly declaring, "I welcome you." Joseph Breeden also jumped up at this moment, lifting his sword in a striking stance, and they both said in unison, "You will regret underestimating us." Luna, seeing the situation, anxiously cried out, "Lord Eren." But Eren remained calm and composed, even wearing a disdainful smile. As the two of them lunged down simultaneously, Eren simply raised his sword to block their attacks. Luna shut her eyes tightly in fear. Eren forcefully knocked Joseph Breeden's and Del Joffrey's swords away, causing them to lose momentum and stagger several steps back. Eren turned his head and coldly reminded Luna, "Don't make me repeat myself. If you don't know how to fight, step back." Luna hesitated, wanting to say something, but Eren interrupted her. "I'll handle that knight for you right now." Eren commanded the elf Kazael. "Kazael, I entrust Miss Serid to you." Kazael hurriedly stepped forward to receive the order as soon as he heard his name. Kazael replied to Eren, "Understood." Then Kazael pulled Luna's dress back and urged her, "Hurry up, human princess, we need to return to safety." Luna walked while glancing back, secretly worrying about Eren. The strength of Breeden is at the top of the Knight Brigade, along with that bandit leader. Will young Master Eren be okay? She continued to stare at Eren, her delicate brows furrowing in deep worry. Eren looked extremely handsome from Luna's perspective, exuding an extraordinary heroism. His cold and aloof demeanor captivated the young girl. Luna couldn't help but blush with embarrassment at Eren's appearance. Eren turned and continued to instruct the evil Tada, "Tada, as I ordered this morning, contact Killian." Tada spread its wings and flew up, obeying. "Understood, Tada will go right away." Joseph Breeden and Del Joffrey sneered at Eren. Breeden said, "It's too late to call for reinforcements, kid." Joffrey added, "Hey, you'll be lying in a puddle of blood before your reinforcements can arrive." Eren was not afraid at all. Instead, he mocked them with a sneer. "You really know how to joke, don't you? Why don't you idiots give it a try?" Eren raised two fingers to taunt them, wearing a scornful smile. "I will be your opponent. Let's continue." Joseph Breeden, attacked with such words, charged forward fiercely with his sword, proudly saying, "Do you think you can keep that face? No matter how you change, you have no battlefield experience at all. I have thousands of times more experience than you." After saying this, he jumped up to slash at Eren, but Eren easily avoided his attack. This left him astonished, with his eyes wide and teeth clenched. His sword had nowhere to rest, pointed downward. At that moment, Eren stepped on the tip of his sword. Immediately, Eren crushed Joseph Breeden's sword with his foot. While Breeden was still stunned, unable to believe his eyes, he muttered in disbelief, "Ha! It broke." Eren jumped from behind, preparing to launch an attack on him. Eren kicked Joseph Breeden in the face, and he screamed in pain. His pearly white teeth were also chipped. A single kick from Eren sent him flying back to where he started, and Del Joffrey was also affected, falling backwards. They screamed painfully. Del Joffrey lay on the ground, gasping for breath from the pain. Joseph Breeden held his face, gritting his teeth as he glared at Eren. Blood was already seeping from the corners of his mouth. Eren pointed the sharp blade of his sword toward them. He sneered, recalling Breeden's earlier words. Battlefield experience, huh? You'll never land a hit on me with that basic swordsmanship of yours. Eren stepped forward and plunged his sword into Joseph Breeden's foot, gently saying, I appreciate the help you've given me in the castle. Eren pulled the sword out and raised it high with both hands, wearing a terrifying smile. This is my way of saying thank you, take it. Joseph Breeden, in fear, raised both hands to shield his head. But it was too late. A cold flash of light gleamed at his right arm, severing it in two. He stared blankly at it. At that moment, it seemed the pain finally hit him. His body was drenched in sweat, his face pale as he looked at his empty arm. Fresh blood began to spurt out. He lay on the ground in agony, desperately staring at his severed arm, crying out mournfully, Ah, my arm, my arm. He used his remaining hand to cover the wound, but fresh blood continued to spurt out. The wretched Del Joffrey, frightened, hurriedly backed away. Eren approached Breeden, stepping on his chest, and sarcastically said, Why are you lying here? Isn't your mission to protect Miss Sarah in the back? He cried out in pain. Eren glared at him coldly, warning him, Drag your ass out of here. Never set foot in my territory again. Breeden trembled in fear, tears streaming from his eye sockets. He hurriedly got up, running for his life, crying out in panic. Eren held two swords in his hands and slowly approached the terrified Del Joffrey, who lay on his back on the ground. He gently said, Now then. He stood in front of him, smiled, and said, Next is you, trash. Del Joffrey humbly asked Eren, You made a pact with the devil, didn't you? He managed a weak smile, trying to appear strong as he said, Many of my teammates are still in the mansion. You don't plan to kill them all, do you? Eren smirked and asked him back, You've forgotten, haven't you? Without waiting for him to reply, he continued, There are still many outstanding soldiers of the Pendragon house. As soon as he finished speaking, the thunderous sound of hooves from the Pendragon army reached them. The red flag of the Pendragon family waved prominently against the deep blue sky. The army stood behind Eren. He leaned on his sword and spoke to Del Joffrey. My work here is done. My outstanding soldiers will handle the rest. He coldly added a sentence to Del Joffrey. The scum who dares to betray the Pendragon house shouldn't think you will have an easy death. Behind him, Killian was holding his sword high, and the soldiers were waving their flags majestically. Del Joffrey was speechless, only raising his eyes in fear, raising his hand to cover his head as if accepting his fate. Eren's cold gaze made the traitor Joffrey shiver in terror. From afar, the elite cavalry was charging forward, trampling over him without mercy. Soon after, this traitor was escorted to the place where he had once tortured innocent villagers. His hands and feet were nailed to a wooden stake shaped like a cross. Below, Eren and Knight Killian, along with the villagers, are watching him. Eren's gaze gradually shifts towards the villagers he had tortured. Everyone is shackled, their faces pale and haggard. Perhaps they had been tormented and beaten by him for many days, but fortunately, they survived. Then Eren tightened his grip on the sword as he noticed the door filled with countless skulls and bones. Thinking of the innocent villagers he had brutally killed, he suddenly frowned. Stepping in front of Joffrey, Eren plunged his sword into his abdomen and said, Hey, since stepping foot in this village, I haven't seen any villagers. Did you kill them all? The traitor, fearing that Eren would kill him, quickly admitted his fault. I'm sorry, please spare my life. Eren only laughed coldly. Spare you? You dared to act freely on my territory and then ask for mercy. This cowardice is fitting for someone like you. Hearing this, Joffrey anxiously asked, Are you going to kill me? Eren calmly replied, The one making the decision is not me. His ambiguous words only made the traitor Joffrey more confused. What? Eren didn't care to announce. Listen carefully. This guy's life will depend on you, the surviving villagers. Tear his flesh, burn him alive, do whatever you want. After saying this, he turned and walked away. The villagers, upon hearing him, suddenly remembered the despicable, inhumane, and cruel acts he had committed against their innocent fellow villagers. Even though they had begged him not to beat them, he had never cared and even ruthlessly killed those unfortunate people. They charged towards him, filled with extreme anger. Joffrey, trembling in fear, pleaded, No, please spare me. But at that moment, the villagers' fury had reached its peak. They charged forward, the words echoing in their minds, Kill him, take revenge for the village, die. And then his blood fell upon the crucifix. The villagers had avenged their village. At this time, Eren had stepped outside. He pushed the door open, entered a quiet room, and stood gazing at the statue of the goddess. Next to the statue, There was someone hiding, holding a sword as if waiting. As he was gazing at the statue, he took the opportunity to rush out and attempt a sneak attack. But unfortunately for him, Eren had noticed, so he quickly parried his ambush. Bam! Eren knocked him down to the ground, stepped on him, and slashed at him. His blood splattered onto the face of the goddess statue. Eren slowly raised his head. "Oh, like God, Leona, you curse me for defiling your eyes. Even though I have been reborn into this body and have the right to live once more, I do not wish to live the life of a traitor. I will cherish everyone, for they deserve respect, and I will make the wicked face the consequences they deserve. That is who I am." After saying that, he removed the necklace and placed it into a box shaped like a cross. He firmly stated, "That is the path I have chosen. If you wish to punish me, when I have fulfilled my vow, I will bear all." Then he turned and walked away. In the north-south village, a villager, unable to hide his gratitude, stepped forward to express, "The young lady is very grateful for your gesture, my Lord Duke." He gently replied, "It's nothing. If anyone needs help with repairs, just let me know." The people were delighted. "Yes, may the gods bless you. Take care, Duke. We will always honor you." Eren nodded in response to the expression of thanks and rode away on horseback. Beside him, the demons he had tamed were speaking up. "Sir, Kazal has worked very hard. Reward Kazal, and Tada has worked hard too." He burst out laughing. "All right, I will reward both of you. Wait for me at the campsite." Kazal and Tada happily embraced each other, waiting for their reward. Knight Killian suggested to his young master, "It seems the north-south village is now peaceful. Should we proceed to Ancona now?" Eren outright declined. "No, I have one more thing to do first." Conrad Castle at night was covered by a starry sky that was both mystical and magnificent, situated on elevated land surrounded by dense forest. Occasionally, a few small twinkling lights from fireflies seemed to add to the castle's brilliance. Everything seemed to paint a beautiful picture. Going back a few days earlier, in Conrad's study, two people were standing and talking to each other. It was unclear what they were discussing, but it seemed quite important. It turns out that Eren Pendragon and the grandmother of Eren's body, Asia Pendragon, are there. Eren is sitting at the table, arms crossed, tilting his face to look at his grandmother, who is drinking tea with a somewhat doubtful expression. "Grandmother, did you say we can use the orcs in Ancona to our advantage?" Eren asked. Grandmother Asia smiled and replied, "Yes, they cannot leave the Ancona woods because they have committed to living within our territory. Their combat abilities far exceed those of ordinary orcs. If you contain them, we will have a significant advantage." Eren leaned on his hands, tilted his head back, and sighed. "Orcs don't care about anything except fighting and slaughtering. Do you really think that it'll help us?" Grandmother Asia remained relaxed, her eyes closed. Listening to what Eren said, she simply laughed and said, "This also depends on your ability to tame them. I think you know this already, but orcs only follow those they see as stronger. The pinnacle of strength for orcs is the power of dragons, but you cannot use that power to persuade them, because they know that Eren was unable to make a pact with Soldrake in the past. So your only option is to fight and defeat them so that they will obey." Grandmother Asia continued. Eren didn't know what to say. He could only close his eyes, furrow his brow, and think, murmuring, "Orc." Mrs. Asia interrupted Eren's train of thought. "I heard you were called the Harbinger of Death on the battlefield. I wonder if you've ever killed an orc?" Eren did not rush to answer. He was silent for a moment. He gently opened his eyes and glanced at her. "I." The scene shifted to a gigantic, ferocious orc with fiery red eyes and sharp fangs. His face was covered in numerous large and small wounds as he let out a loud roar. What was surprising was that there were many daggers lodged in his body. The scene expanded to show the massive orc aggressively facing Raven Vault, holding a giant blade, ready to charge at Raven at any moment. Raven was not in much better shape. He had a large wound on his face that was bleeding profusely, and his whole body was battered, as if he had just gone through an intense battle. Raven looked at the orc, panting, thinking, "Damn it, it's injured so badly, but why isn't it dead yet?" The orc, severely wounded but still brimming with vigor, grasped the spear embedded in his chest. Without hesitation, he yanked it out in one swift motion and let it drop to the ground. He staggered, breathing heavily as he glared at Raven with blood-red eyes devoid of any pupils. Then, with a thunderous roar, he raised his massive blade, took a running start, and charged toward Raven at a blistering speed. He swung the blade down hard, aiming for the ground where Raven stood. Luckily, Raven was a step quicker and dodged the orc's strike. Raven frowned as he observed the orc. The orc gritted his teeth, turning to face Raven again. Without a pause, he swung his blade once more. Raven immediately dropped to one knee, bending forward. He was beginning to show signs of fatigue from the prolonged fight. "If this battle drags on, I'll be at a disadvantage." The accumulating wounds made Raven wince in pain. He looked at the orc, who was raising his weapon for another attack, and started to formulate a plan. Raven clenched his jaw. I pierced his heart, yet he's still alive. Next, it'll have to be his neck. The orc swung his massive blade forward once more. With no other options, Raven quickly stepped back to avoid the blow. The sword swung towards Raven, who coldly tilted his body to avoid it, and took the opportunity to raise his sword above his right arm. As expected, Raven aimed his sword directly at the orc's neck, just as he had originally intended. The sword was wielded so swiftly that the blade was almost invisible. Truly, Raven lived up to his reputation as a master swordsman. Fortunately, the sword pierced through the right side of the giant orc's neck. Seizing the moment, Raven propelled himself upward, using the orc's shoulder as a pivot, causing his body to tilt backward. Raven gritted his teeth, pushing himself up with his other hand, his gaze coldly fixed on the orc. At this point, Raven stood on the orc's body, holding the hilt of the sword embedded deep in its neck. Without any mercy or hesitation, Raven gathered momentum and directly beheaded the orc before jumping to the ground as its body fell. Returning to reality, Eren pondered deeply, his eyebrows furrowed. He then gently recounted to Mrs. Asia, I once encountered an orc when I first joined the Demon Legion. I defeated it, but it was a tough battle. However, if I were to fight them again now, I think I could. Grandma Asia smiled brightly, giving a thumbs up. Awesome, so you can tame it. She laughed and continuously painted a bright future for Eren. After you defeat the orc in Ancona, you can quickly open the tomb. Eren could only sigh upon hearing this, looking at her with a doubtful expression, thinking to himself, oh god, this sounds too easy. Meanwhile, the sound of horses' hooves echoed through the air. A herd of horses with neatly trimmed hooves collided with the ground, creating a series of loud clattering noises. The surrounding scenery opened up. This was a desolate place surrounded by many trees and hills. In front of them was a path, and a group of nearly 10 people were casually riding horses. Suddenly, a voice rang out, barely concealing its surprise. Who will turn the orc in Ancona into allies? It turned out that the group of horsemen was Eren's cavalry, and the speaker was his subordinate, Mark Killian. He awkwardly addressed Eren. I'm not sure about this, sir. Eren turned to look at Mark and replied, raiding the Ancona forest with just a few of us is a difficult task, isn't it? To minimize losses, we need strong individuals. Mark responded, but if we fight the orcs, they could definitely defeat all of us. Suddenly, Kazal and Tada appear out of nowhere, blocking Eren's horse. Kazal stood on Tada's back, waving his hand. That's right, master. They explained earnestly. Kazal said, fighting orcs is like going to one's own death. Tada was now in tears. Tada doesn't want to die. Eren didn't even bother to glance at them, simply riding past and sighing in response. I hate the defeatist mindset, so you better think that we will win. Otherwise, I will throw you to the dragons. The two creatures, hearing Eren's cold words, could only tear up and pitifully call out, Master. Suddenly, a loud shout came from somewhere, capturing Eren's attention. Stay away from me. Mark also recognized that this voice sounded like Breeden's. Eren immediately turned his horse around, puzzled. Is he still here? What the hell is he doing? Kazal leaned forward, squinted one eye, placed his hand on his forehead to observe in the distance, and said, Master, it looks bad. Eren asked again, what's happening? He stuttered. That's the Ancona orc group. Eren perked up at this, a hint of delight showing on his face for some reason. On the other hand, Mark was surprised, his eyes widening. Without saying a word, Eren spurred his horse forward, leaving Mark behind, calling after him, Yub, master. The scene shifted, and a shaken sword tip appeared. The one holding the sword was Joseph Breeden. His face was pale, and his whole body trembled despite holding the sword. Nearby stood Luna Serud, also visibly frightened. At this moment, Breeden had fallen off his horse and was squatting on the ground with the sword pointed ahead. It turned out he was blocked by a group of huge orcs, around 5 of them, each wielding clubs that looked very intimidating. Behind him, a distance away from Breeden, was Luna, still seated on her horse. Breeden shouted in fear, Stop! I told you to stay away from me. Luna was terrified. Just as she had expected, being with him was not good at all. She recalled what happened when she was riding her horse, cursing at Breeden standing on the ground. Her attitude was extremely angry. Do you have any idea what you have done? Breeden did not look good. He was missing his right arm, which was bandaged, but that didn't stop Luna's fury. Pointing a sword at Duke Eren was equivalent to pointing a sword at the Empire. If you really want to rebel, then get out of my family. Breeden heard this and immediately feared, begging, Miss, please don't expel me. I still have to escort you back to the Serad territory, so please. Luna softened her tone, but the contempt behind it was still evident. Yes, your only task is to protect me. Luna sat on her horse, casting a superior glance at Breeden, her tone laced with disdain. This is the moment for you to know your place. My father will decide your punishment when we return. Breeden could only grit his teeth, enduring Luna's humiliating words with his head bowed. At this point, Luna had no desire to hear anything more, so she urged her horse to leave, saying, "My trip ends here. Hurry up, I want to rest." The scene returned to reality, and the orcs now appeared angry. The leader gritted his teeth, exposing two long, sharp lower fangs. He scowled and shouted, "Hey human, you're pointing your sword at us." The atmosphere right now is truly terrifying. The orcs seem like they could go berserk at any moment, slaughtering humans without warning, making Breeden tremble in fear, holding his sword aimed at the orcs despite it being virtually ineffective. The leader, with a long scar beside his left eye, snorts disdainfully and loudly says, "Do you want to die?" Breeden cannot say anything. Tears streamed from the corners of his eyes, his whole body shaking, and his throat could only manage a few whimpers. Then suddenly a voice rang out, "What are you doing?" It was Eren's voice. He was riding a horse not far away. The leader turned his head towards the source of the voice. Breeden was also drawn to look. Luna was taken by surprise, her face simply flushing a bit. She exclaimed, "Duke Eren." Eren, with his cold expression and long hair, was expertly handling the reins of his horse. His straight back, clad in silver armor, only enhanced his handsomeness. Breeden felt as if he had seen a lifeline. Without thinking twice, he sprang up and ran towards Eren, shouting, "Damn it! Damn it! Please save me." Eren glanced at the man on horseback, his eyes filled with contempt. He sighed and thought, how could someone like him become a knight? At the same time, Eren's cavalry charged forward. Leading the charge was Mark, who shouted loudly as he rode, "Young master, please wait. It's too dangerous for you to go alone. Please don't get too close." The bright red Pendragon flag, featuring a proud white emblem in the center, was waved by the cavalry. The orc leader frowned as he observed. He recognized the flag and thought to himself, "The Pendragon banner, so that kid is." Then he laughed loudly, seemingly understanding. He extended his arm and pointed at Eren, arrogantly declaring, "Eren Pendragon, just the person I wanted to see." Eren did not respond, only narrowing his eyes. Suddenly, the orc made a move. Instantly, a nameless aura of menace shot straight toward Eren's group. Mark seemed frozen, clearly affected. His face turned pale, and he was filled with panic inside. The killing intent from the orc made it so he could barely move, or even breathe. He was breathing heavily, turning to Eren and stammering, "Master, just as we suspected. This is too dangerous. We must retreat." Eren did not respond, immediately dismounting. All the soldiers were surprised by Eren's actions. Mark thought, can he move? Why is he going without any weapons like that? Eren's face was cold as he moved forward, surprising everyone. He commanded, facing the giant orc, showing no fear and even smiling. "Stay in your positions and do not draw your swords." He even felt a bit confident upon seeing the orc's puzzled expression. "I alone am more than enough." Eren continued with a smile, to be his opponent. The orcs fell silent. Then the leader grinned, cracking his knuckles as if ready to crush his opponent, his gaze incredibly fierce. Eren stood face to face with the orc leader, both of them grinning at each other. Each wore a confident, victorious expression. Standing before them, Eren asked the orcs, "Are you the orcs from Ancona?" The leader still wore a proud expression, leaning forward to press his face close to Eren's as if to assert his superiority, and replied briefly, "So what?" Eren did not respond. Instead, he smiled kindly, but unexpectedly he used his head and forcefully smashed it into the opponent's face. The sound of the hit was quite loud, and just hearing it was enough to evoke a sense of pain. The giant orc, struck in the face, instinctively leaned back, blood from his nose splattering everywhere. Eren looked at the orc he had just taken down with mocking eyes and a smirk. The giant orc was hit in the face by Eren and collapsed to the ground in front of everyone's gaze. The orcs accompanying him couldn't help but gasp in astonishment at the scene. Eren's side was no better. Everyone was utterly surprised. Mark's heart was in turmoil. This is bad. Starting a fight first is a bit much. But the subsequent reaction from the orcs was to burst into laughter. They all laughed heartily, breaking out in joyful mirth. One of them mocked, "Carta's nose is bleeding. He got hit by a human and is bleeding." The group of people led by Mark sat on their horses, looking on in confusion. Carta stood up abruptly, raising his club high while wiping blood from his nose, angrily shouting, "Yuma, shut up quickly." Then he addressed Eren in an angry tone. "Pendragon, what the hell are you doing?" Eren calmly replied, "I should be asking you that." Eren's face grew cold as he questioned them. "According to the agreement you made with the Pendragon family, you are not allowed to leave the forest, but now you have broken the law." Carta, furious, glared and blamed. "It's your fault." He planted his weapon into the ground and pointed at Eren, saying, "You have been rejected by the Forest Guardian. We orcs do not bow to the weak." He continued his arrogant remarks, ignoring Eren's evident displeasure. "So even if we submit to the Forest Guardian, we will not submit to you. We've lost your equal status with the Guardian due to a failed pact." Eren squinted at him, thinking, The forest guardian, is he referring to Soldrake? Karta continued to boast that despicable face was truly provoking. He spoke loudly. That's why we have to leave the forest to taste blood and fight to the end for territorial control. Eren smiled lightly. I understand, you're just bloodthirsty, aren't you? His face became dangerous as he slowly approached Karta. However, I want your power, but it seems you are not listening to me. Eren's handsome face looked bright, his eyes somewhat threatening as he looked at the orcs. That's why I went through enough trouble to come here, I'm sure you understand. He paused for a moment, observing Karta's face, wondering why am I not holding a weapon right. Karta snorted with a mocking tone, you're just a human, but you know the rules of the orcs. Then for some reason, he dropped the spiked club without a second thought, throwing it to the ground. Eren crossed his arms, responding softly, I know very well, while Karta lowered his center of gravity as if into a fighting stance. Eren said, it seems we are reiterating the laws of the orcs. When the opponent is unarmed, one must also drop their weapon. When someone challenges to a duel, it must be accepted. Karta wore a very amused expression. Eren frowned, but his face showed a provocative expression. Let's have a match, shall we? He shouted loudly, if we're fighting, let's do it. Then both quickly charged at each other like a gust of wind. Karta took advantage of his large body, lunging like a beast, using his muscular arm to punch forcefully into the ground where Eren was standing. But Eren quickly dodged, using Karta's body as leverage to launch himself upward. While jumping, Eren glanced at him, feeling cautious. It seemed that his fighting skills were far better than those of other orcs. If a normal person were to fight him, they might break a bone. Just as he jumped away, Karta quickly stood up, his reflexes very fast. While Eren was still in midair, Karta raised his right fist and swung it with tremendous force toward Eren, forcing him to use his leg to defend it against the punch. This resulted in a large crack appearing in the ground right beneath Karta's feet, causing it to sink slightly. The onlookers witnessed this scene in astonishment and great confusion. Luna's group couldn't close their mouths due to worry. Eren, after the block, landed safely. He raised an eyebrow, seemingly having noticed something. He looked down at his feet, and it seemed a scuff mark had appeared on his shoe from the recent kick. While observing, he thought to himself, he is quite strong, but he can't compare to the orcs I've fought in the past. He blurted out, he hasn't used his full strength yet. In the midst of the thick smoke, the large figure of Karta appeared along with a loud voice. Of course. His body manifested, preparing another punch aimed at Eren. Prideful, if I were to use my full strength, your kind would die immediately. Therefore, I only exert myself when I encounter someone who can block my punch. Eren smirked. Oh, then you better go all out now. Karta's gaze suddenly turned bright red. The punch was thrown out rapidly as he said, Of course, I didn't expect you to pique my interest like this. You are indeed an interesting fellow. The lightning-fast punch grazed Eren's face, startling him and forcing him to lean back to evade it. The punch, with astonishing speed, left a short, bloody cut on his left cheek, making him mentally exclaim, that was fast. While Eren was wiping the blood away with his hand, Karta continued to raise his fist. Then he lunged toward Eren without warning, his mouth still moving. I want to fight you to the very end, so don't die too soon. Pendragon, he shouted loudly and delivered a powerful punch to Eren, catching him off guard. Eren used both hands to shield himself from Karta's attack. Although he managed to block it, Eren was still pushed back. His gaze and expression revealed that he was affected by an immense force. Luna gasped and covered her mouth in fear. Mark frowned and stammered. Duke, he shouted loudly. Outside the forest, on one side were knights riding horses, and on the other side were Karta's men, with white smoke rising. Karta looked at his hand and thought, he must have taken my punch, but this feeling. Then a foot stepped out from the smoke, cursing. Damn it! That was Eren. The white smoke dissipated and he smiled, his cloak fluttering behind him. He raised his face, his forehead bleeding, and the blood was dripping down. Eren, with a frustrated expression, said, Lately, I had to fight against those little pests, which is making my body a bit annoyed. Luna Sarad and Joseph Breeden were taken aback by this. Some of the orcs were surprised as well, but there were others who calmly smiled as if they had known it would happen. Mark Killian was no exception. Kezadal and Tata couldn't keep their mouths shut. He was bewildered, as if he couldn't believe his eyes, then thought to himself, I can't believe it. After receiving the devastating attack from the orc, he can still stand up. Then he gritted his teeth. But I have never heard that an ordinary person can defeat orcs in a one-on-one fight. He is the precious heir of our Duke family. Protecting his life is the top priority. Mark Killian raised his hand, pulling the reins to order everyone, protect the Duke. Upon hearing this, others rushed in, responding, at your command. But Eren raised his hand to signal them to stop, and they halted. Then he seriously said, This is my fight against the orcs. I do not need your protection. Upon hearing this, Mark Killian looked at him, gritting his teeth. But he still had to reply, at your command. A clap echoed. Cradle walked and laughed. Kuhihi. Amazing. Amazing. He has survived after facing Karta, the strongest orc of the Ancona forest. He looked at him and continued. Pendragon is indeed a formidable man. The two stood looking at each other, witnessed by many others. Eren clapped his hands together, saying, "This will be the perfect way to restore our previous senses. I think it's time to use all our strength now." Karta also clapped his hands together, smiling in response. "You are the first ordinary person to survive after taking my knockout punch. But sooner or later, you will fall due to the wounds on your body." Eren lowered his head, ran his hand through his hair, and asked, "Oh, really? Aren't you underestimating me a bit? A punch with such little power combined with my regeneration abilities feels just like a mosquito bite." He lifted his head, and the bleeding had already stopped. The wound on his forehead was beginning to heal. Karta silently wondered, has his wound disappeared already? Karta then extended his two legs. He charged forward, shouting, "You've touched my excitement, you damn Pendragon." Karta clenched his fist and slammed one down onto the ground, causing the earth to crack. But Eren managed to jump up in time to avoid the attack. He leaped up, kicking the ground below, which flew up due to Karta's punch. He thought, to defeat him, I need to unleash my full power. He landed behind Karta, knowing that to do this, he first had to stop his movements. Eren looked up and smiled, realizing he had the advantage. The way orcs think is incredibly simple. Moreover, with my regeneration ability, it's as easy as pie. Karta turned around, using the force of the protruding rock to press down on it, jumping up and extending his hand. "Where do you get that arrogant attitude from, you dog Pendragon? Aren't you getting tired of always dodging me?" Eren knelt down, smirking mockingly, and asked, "You fool, you damned orc, do the orcs in the Ancona forest only know how to throw punches?" He ran over faster, angrily asking, "Do you dare mock us?" Eren remained standing there, smiling. Karta lifted his leg, saying, "I will make you take back those slanderous words." Karta kicked straight at him, but he was not afraid, his face beaming with a smile for having achieved his goal. He thought to himself, "You've fallen into the trap." Then Karta kicked straight at Eren. Eren used both hands to block it, but one leg hit him and sent him flying. Mark Killian saw this and panicked, shouting, "Keep your arm." Karta smiled triumphantly, saying, "Your arm is now crippled, isn't it? This is your downfall, Pendragon." At that moment, Eren smiled because he had achieved what he wanted. Tricked, he grabbed Karta's leg and his hand had healed. Karta was startled. Eren calmly continued, "My hand is always ready to seize you." He looked at Karta, wiping one eye, his eyebrows raised, and his mouth curling into a smirk. Eren declared, "But today, you are surely going to die, you orc from the Ancona forest." Karta anxiously thought to himself, "I must have broken his bones, why is he still able to move?" Then Karta realized that, from the beginning, this had been a trap he had set. Suddenly, Eren let go of Karta's leg. He jumped up, one leg preparing to strike Karta. Seeing this, Karta worriedly thought, "I'm in trouble. I can't dodge." Eren's gaze radiated danger. He kicked straight into Karta's face. Karta flew up into the air, screamed, and even lost a few teeth. Eren glanced over and then bent down, while Karta fell from above. Mark Killian, Kazel, and Tata were taken by surprise, eyes wide open, unable to close their mouths. Kazel also began to tear up. Luna Serad held her hands, shocked as if she couldn't believe this reality, and Joseph Breeden felt the same way. Cradle smiled at the scene. The orcs shouted, "Awesome." Then they ran over to Karta, raising their hands and shouting, "Amazing." They yelled, "Karta has been defeated. Pendragon is indeed a formidable force." He stood majestically, looking down at Karta. He saw Karta kneeling on the ground while the orcs were helping Karta up. Mark Killian dismounted his horse. He reached out, hurried over, and exclaimed, "Duke, let us tend to your wounds." Eren turned back to look. Then he turned his head again and said, "It's fine. It doesn't hurt much." He was taken back. "What?" Mark Killian looked at him and asked, "Why do you say that?" Eren sighed, grabbing hold of his left arm. His arm trembled, and his face showed pain. He gritted his teeth and thought, the pain during recovery is much worse than the injury itself, but at least I have been granted this power. Eren tried to grasp it again, then let go. He smiled with relief. After that, he walked over to where Karta and Koma's orc was sitting. He bent down and asked, "You are Karta, right?" Eren commanded, "Follow me. That is an order." Upon hearing this, Karta showed no signs of opposition. Karta replied, "All right, to the victor belongs the spoils. What do you want us to do?" He responded, "From now on, we will begin preparations to conquer the Ancona forest. You must assist us." Karta raised his head in confusion and asked, "For what purpose? You are already a guardian deity." Eren calmly said, "I will open the tomb." Hearing him say that, the orcs were all surprised. Karta quickly stood up and anxiously asked, "Does the guardian spirit want to make a pact with us?" He said, "That's right. On the way to Soldrake, you will have to face countless monsters, so much so that you will be fed up. Then Eren asked, is it fun? From now on, you can fight every day. Carter was moved, his eyes shimmering. He followed Eren and cheerfully raised his hand, saying, it's a piece of cake. Those monsters are just like mosquitoes to us. We can take them down in the blink of an eye. He walked and said, if that's the case, then I can feel at ease. Eren went to where the man was holding his sword, and the knight nodded. He picked up the sword and drew it. Carta seemed to have understood its significance. Carta knelt down. The orcs behind him also understood. One person knelt down, then two, and then three. Eren pointed the tip of the sword at Carta, declaring under the gaze of those around, the orcs of Ancona will henceforth dedicate their strength to House Pendragon. Let's give it our all. Carta bowed her head and smiling happily in acceptance. Luna Sarah looked at the scene before her, feeling emotional. However, next to her, a few people showed anger, namely Joseph Breeden. It was now afternoon, the sunlight shining warmly. They had moved to the bridge. Eren said, we will have the soldiers escort you back to Serad. Now we will return to our territory. Luna bowed her head in response. Yes, thank you. Then she looked over at Joseph Breeden and continued, and you. He flinched. Eren's face was filled with anger as he warned, next time you dare to point your sword at me, I won't stop at just an arm. Hearing this, he trembled all over, not daring to lift his face. Eren mounted his horse and walked away, not bothering to look at his face, which was gritted in anger. Eren called, let's go, Carta. Suddenly, Luna reached out and ran forward, pushing Joseph Breeden aside and yelling, ah. He glanced back. Luna's face was sparkling, thinking to herself, surely he will. She watched Eren's group walk away, led by him, which included Carta, Mark Killian, Kezael, and Tada. Following behind were the orcs. She was sure he would fulfill the dragon's contract and open the tomb. Seeing his silhouette riding the horse exuding majesty, Luna looked at him with flushed cheeks and called out his name, Eren Pendragon. She gazed at him with reluctance. Joseph Breeden, standing behind, glanced over with clenched fists, showing his anger. The sun set and the moon appeared. He looked ahead and said, I have seen it. The Ancona forest. Everyone stood on the edge of the cliff as the wind blew, Eren's hair fluttering in the breeze. Mark Killian looked down with worry. Kezael and Tada were also frightened. While Carta was ready, he spoke up. From now on, everything will begin. Eren excitedly said, finally, I can start my battle. At this moment, the white dragon was looking up at the sky, a sky radiating purple, with 3 columns. The white dragon stood on the central column. Perhaps the white dragon felt it. You have arrived, haven't you? Then the white dragon bowed down, closed its eyes, and said, I am here, try to find the entrance to this mansion. O aim deprived of the soul of Pendragon. In the Ancona forest in the valley, there is a stream of water flowing below. Suddenly, a snake cried out in pain. A bloody axe was raised. It was Carta's men. They were searching for food, and then he chopped the snake in half. On Carta's side, he struck the snake hard with a stick. Carta laughed. Ha! Killing these snakes isn't even enough to get me started. I'm sick of constantly dealing with these weaklings. On the other side of the river were Carta and the orcs, while on this side were the knights with swords and crossbows. They seemed quite exhausted. Suddenly, 2 snakes flew towards them. A knight did not have time to react. He fell and said, Dan. At that moment, Eren appeared, drawing his sword and swinging it to chop the 2 snakes. The knight looked at him in surprise. He knelt down, placed a hand on the ground, and nodded lightly, saying, Duke, thank you. Eren replied, it's nothing. Eren turned to call Cradle's name. I entrust you with the task of treating the injured. Cradle heard this and laughed. Hee. Understood, don't worry. I will use extremely effective herbs, so just leave it to me. Mark Killian quickly slid down from above and shouted loudly, asking, Duke, are you injured anywhere? He turned around to look, then stepped forward and said, I'm fine. How are the remaining soldiers? He replied, there aren't many Quetzalcoatl upstream, so they haven't been hurt much. We could continue fighting, but when we enter another battle with the demons, the troops might become exhausted. Eren explained, Quetzalcoatl is a legendary creature, a snake with many feathers. You can Google it to see a picture. Eren turned to Carta and asked, how much longer until we reach Soldrake's mansion? Carta put his hand to his chin and said, I'm not sure, but then Carta pointed ahead. If we go a bit further, we will see signs of a quarry. The only thing I can say for certain is that there is a cave connecting to the guardian god's mansion in that area. Eren asked further, is there anything we need to be cautious about on the way to that quarry? Carta replied, no, this area is still the territory of the orcs. Those wretched snakes come here only to find drinking water. Then we will continue our journey. When we reach the traces of that quarry, we will set up camp there and begin searching for the cave at sunrise. Carta and Mark Killian hurriedly followed behind. Eren turned back and said, If we accidentally get caught up in a battle on the way, the orcs and I will handle them. Let's depart right away. Mark Killian and Carta smiled. The two of them ran behind, shouting, "At your command!" Night fell. Eren and the horse stepped onto the stairs. He looked up. Before him were towering cliffs with wind blowing down from above. The group stood and watched. Mark Killian looked worried. Carta remained calm, while Khazal and Tata stood there, bewildered. Eren looked up and silently thought, "This place is much scarier than an ordinary quarry." Suddenly, he turned and asked Carta, "Why is this quarry sealed off?" Carta, resting his chin on his hand, bowed his head and said, "I don't have the details, but according to the orc elder, the goblins used to mine here. However, there are rumors that all the goblins disappeared simultaneously from this location and never returned." Hearing that, he looked at Khazal and Tata, who was startled. He called out Khazal's name. It nervously replied, "Khazal doesn't live in the forest, so Khazal doesn't know." It shouted, besides, "Khazal has never heard of goblins mining here. Khazal is better at stealing than working." Eren, Carta, and Tata helplessly said after hearing this, "This is so." Mark Killian glanced over to ask the Duke, "Is something wrong?" He reminded, "It's best that we don't leave this area until sunrise. The orc soldiers may take turns keeping watch, so let's set up tents and let the soldiers rest." Mark Killian replied, "As you command." Eren walked over to the horses and then said, "Carta, I'm sorry, but you have to take care of the watch now." Carta waved goodbye and walked away, saying, "All right, I will inform the other soldiers. Good night, Pendragon." The fire was lit. The orcs leaned against trees to sleep. Khazal and Tata spread out blankets, leaning against each other to sleep. Eren set up 4 tents. A knight was sitting with a sword in hand, keeping watch. Suddenly, a squelching sound echoed. He glanced over, but nothing appeared. He stood up, confused, then bent forward, sword at the ready, wondering, what was that sound? Suddenly, a gigantic scythe appeared, slicing through him. Streams of purple mist emerged. He stood frozen. Blood dripped down his face, and his eyes turned to whites. He uttered the word, and then fell, only managing to call out, "Do." He strained to shout, "Duke." Eren sat silently in the tent. He thought, "Damn, something's wrong. Why did the goblins all vanish at once?" He said no, and then wondered perhaps they didn't disappear. They were likely wiped out, but by whom? At that moment, a cloaked figure stood on the cliff, surrounded by swirling purple mist. He held a staff, his face like a skull, and suddenly skeletal hands began to rise. Those skeletal hands had also started to emerge in front of Eren's tent. Meanwhile, Raven, within Eren's body resting in their team's tent, looked up and concluded, so they didn't disappear, they were forced to disappear. Then, as he was questioning and asking further, which bastard caused this? Outside the Eren team's hut, a mysterious figure cloaked in a black outfit, holding a staff, stood on a cliff, exuding a powerful and terrifying dark aura as he observed everything. He immediately cast a spell from the dark purple staff. Right after the spell was activated, beneath the ground where the Eren team's hut was located, skeletal hands suddenly began to emerge, reaching up and slowly rising from the earth. Gradually, the monsters, including both human skeletons and multi-headed beasts, began to rise up from the ground thanks to the activation of dark magic. Once they had fully surfaced, they instantly transformed into a terrifying army of skeletal monsters with a gigantic 2-headed creature standing in the middle. They had fiery red eyes emitting a horrifying power, staring intently towards the Eren team's hut, where Raven was inside. At that moment, Eren inside the tent sensed something that made him startle, quickly frowning in surprise. Then, in a flash, he hurriedly grabbed his 2 swords, lifted the tent flap, and rushed outside. When Eren Pendragon burst out, he immediately saw a powerful army of skeletal warriors, accompanied by a gigantic and terrifying 2-headed monster, which was gaping with its tongue out and baring its teeth at him with reddened eyes. While Eren Pendragon, with his swords in hand, was still in shock, the 2-headed monster immediately opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth as it attempted to swallow him whole. Seeing this, Raven within Eren quickly began to think, his eyes focused solely on the gaping 2-headed monster. He quickly calculated and then immediately flipped over, using both hands to press down and seal the monster's mouth shut. As he blocked its mouth with his hands, Raven in Eren's mind looked at the bewildered monsters standing below and wondered, where did they come from? Thinking to himself, he immediately swung his sword with both hands, creating a diagonal cross shape. While turning over, Eren Pendragon voiced his answer. There's no doubt about it, it's those goblins. As soon as he finished speaking, while still turning over, he quickly delivered a powerful slash to the top of the 2-headed monster's head. The blow caused it to wince in pain, gritting its teeth in surprise. After that, the 2-headed monster, unable to withstand the pain, immediately roared in agony. The roar was so loud that it startled everyone else in the tent, including Eren Pendragon's teammates. the brown-haired man, and the black-haired man, who were sleeping together in the tent. Tada the eagle, who was outside sleeping with the elf Kazel, woke up in shock upon hearing the scream. However, while Tada was anxious, Kazel beside him continued to sleep soundly, undisturbed. By a tree, Karta and his friend were also resting against the trunk. Hearing the roar, they suddenly opened their eyes and looked around. Returning to the inside of the tent, Mark Killian, who had also heard the commotion outside, was suddenly jolted awake, looking surprised. Then, everyone, whether inside the tent or outside, quickly grabbed their weapons and hurriedly ran out. Mark Killian was the first to rush out, worriedly shouting, "What the hell is happening?" As he was about to say more, he was immediately taken aback by the scene before him. For in front of everyone, Raven, in Eren's body, was climbing onto the two-headed monster and preparing to use his sword to kill it. Upon witnessing this, one person in the crowd hesitantly called out, "Took." As for Eren Pendragon, upon hearing the voices of the people calling him, he immediately froze, suddenly startled. Without saying anything, his hand swiftly thrust the sword into one of the red eyes of one side of the two-headed monster. Having pierced one of its eyes, Eren Pendragon jumped down to the ground. As for the monster whose eye was pierced by the sword, it let out a pained roar. It opened its mouth to counterattack, but immediately, Eren Pendragon, standing calmly, sliced through its neck with the remaining sword. At that moment, under Eren's final blow, inside was Raven. The two-headed monster instantly surrendered, collapsing in front of a line of skeletal monster troops behind it. Then, witnessing everything, Mark Killian and Karta, weapons in hand, saw Eren Pendragon pulling the sword from the monster's eye and immediately rushed over, shouting Took. As they got closer to him, Mark Killian and Karta asked, "What's the situation?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly looked up and saw something, his expression showing unexpected surprise. In front of them, there were thousands of small skeleton monsters moving over the corpse of the two-headed monster to approach them. Seeing this, Mark Killian, along with Eren Pendragon and Karta, looked up simultaneously. He then inquired, "Aren't those skeletons the goblins digging for minerals?" Hearing him say that, Karta, who was standing next to him, suddenly turned and asked, so who killed them?" Seeing Karta's puzzled question, Eren Pendragon, standing in front of both of them, coldly speculated, "Lick." Raven, upon seeing the skeleton army, immediately realized that it was being controlled by something akin to the Grim Reaper. He continued to conclude, "Only it has the ability to use corpses as its minions. Perhaps all of them were killed by it. It may want to stop us from swearing allegiance to the dragon and performing the opening ceremony of the tomb." As he mentioned this, Eren Pendragon frowned and looked up at the skeleton army. Meanwhile, behind Eren Pendragon, Karta and Mark Killian fell silent, not saying anything as they stared at him. Just as Eren had killed the two-headed monster, an entire army of bizarre monsters emerged behind them from the dark magic, continuing to swarm around and immediately blocking the path of Eren Pendragon's team in front of the hut. Seeing this, Raven in Eren's body spoke to everyone. "As you can see, we are now surrounded, so we have no choice but to deal with them." With that, he glanced at the monsters and spotted the two-headed creature from before as well as the dark purple serpent. Seeing them, Eren Pendragon continued speaking. "They will not disappear until we find the mastermind." With that, standing in front of his teammates, he immediately pointed his sword towards the monsters and seriously said, "I will find that person and eliminate them. In the meantime, you need to buy me some time." Upon hearing this, Karta calmly stood, resting his pestle and mortar weapon on his shoulder. Mark Killian also took up his sword, ready to obey the command to fight. As soon as Eren Pendragon finished speaking, his teammates, each holding a sword, charged forward, collectively shouting at the monsters, "Let's go!" Karta and Karta's friends were also joining everyone in rising up to fight. Two strong individuals immediately used their pestles to smash each skeleton to pieces. On the other side, Mark Killian was also advancing in battle while pondering. "They have brought countless soldiers to prevent us from restoring the renowned Pendragon family. However, I will not let you succeed." With that thought, Mark Killian's fighting movements became decisive. He slashed at the horde of skeleton monsters with his sword, causing them to shatter and fall to the ground. Deep in his heart, he continued to think, recalling and telling himself, "The Duke has changed a lot. It seems he has become a completely different person. Perhaps he will achieve accomplishments that our ancestors could not." With these thoughts in mind, Mark Killian then continued to think that if it were him, he would definitely control the White Dragon and perform the tomb opening ceremony, restoring the glorious past of the family, making it thrive as it once did. Our period of decline is over. The Pendragon family will definitely rise again. As soon as he thought of this, suddenly at the spot where Mark Killian was standing, another one-headed monster appeared, angrily slowly approaching him. When he saw it, Mark Killian felt a bit scared and trembled. But then he reassured himself, exhaled, and stammered his thoughts in fear, telling himself, All right, we are the proud knights of the White Dragon. As soon as he finished speaking, Mark Killian immediately took his sword and with all of his strength struck the monster with a single blow. It was caught off guard, let out a painful cry, and opened its mouth wide. In the next moment, its head was severed, blood splattering everywhere. Under its own weight, the monster's head immediately slammed against a rock, making a loud thud. Seeing this, Mark Killian let out a sigh of relief. On the other hand, from a distance, 3 skeletal monsters armed with weapons were standing and observing something. Then the 3 skeletons raised their spears high before the head of that monster on the stone wall. Immediately, all 3 skeleton monsters leaned to one side, thrusting their spears straight towards the same target. Their target was Eren, but at that moment it was Eren Pendragon. Eren Pendragon was currently fighting alone against 2 dark purple serpents, so he didn't pay any attention to the spears heading his way. When he suddenly sensed something, Eren Pendragon turned his head to glance and saw what was happening. He immediately thought, as he had guessed, they were aiming for Eren's life. Therefore, he didn't have time to find that lick. Thinking like that, he turned his sword around behind him. Then quickly, he used it to stab straight into the eye of one dark purple serpent. As for the other, Eren Pendragon immediately kicked it hard and used it as a shield against the 3 spears that were flying straight towards him. After a long while, after defeating the 2 dark purple serpents, Eren Pendragon looked up at the sky. He frowned and thought, wondering which dog had plotted all of this. The downfall of the Pendragon family and Valt's amnesty were related. They were here to block the way because they wanted to take something from us. Thinking this way, he unconsciously looked up and smiled gently. When he saw the remaining snakes still alive and staring at him, Eren Pendragon began to speak to himself. All right, then I will help you. In his heart, he firmly thought, I will restore power to the family, not let you achieve your desires, so you can comfortably come here to block our way. Thinking this way, Eren Pendragon smiled proudly. He continued to think and talk to himself. At the same time, the dark purple snake opened its mouth to swallow him whole. Immediately, Eren Pendragon swung his sword and split the snake in half. While killing it, he continued to think, I will surely revive the renowned Valt family with my own hands. As soon as it was cut in half, the purple snake monster immediately collapsed in front of Eren, but inside was Raven. Just defeated the monster, he glanced at his teammates and thought to himself, we've already eliminated quite a few. Eren Pendragon continued to observe everyone while thinking, although they are just skeleton goblins with such overwhelming numbers they won't last long, and there's also the lake. Suddenly, while he was lost in thought, a dark demonic creature appeared and flew in front of Eren, leaving him no time to react as his eyes widened in shock. Liches are wizards who have sealed their own souls and become immortal. Their malevolence, which has defined the laws of nature, has made them targets of attack, even in a place that accepts magic and sorcery like this empire. They are willing to do anything to achieve their goals. For this reason, it is quite unusual for the empire to order the Rakshasa Legion, whose deaths go unremarked, to defeat them. In battle, suffering heavy casualties is also quite normal. Thinking of this, Raven recalled the moment when he was still in his own body. At that time, he and a bald-headed teammate witnessed a person being impaled by a blade. The person let out a pained yet Raven remained completely calm, while his teammate was visibly alarmed and frightened. In an instant, the blade was pulled out of the person and their head exploded. Raven and his bald-headed teammate were startled by the sight. Just as Raven turned in shock, blood from the victim splattered onto his face. Seeing the lifeless body collapse to the ground, while his remaining teammate trembled in terror, Raven couldn't help but wonder in surprise. What was that? Who just killed him? As he thought this, panic surged through him, and he swiftly turned around to glance over. Seeing the Lich still standing motionless, he thought further, the Lich hasn't moved. What's going on here? Is this some sort of dark magic? When he caught a clear glimpse of its face, nothing but bone, razor-sharp teeth, and terrifying black eyes staring straight at him. Raven's bald-headed teammate shuddered in fear and let out a horrified scream. Ah! He quickly turned and ran away, still shouting, Hey, ghosts, they really exist? Hearing this, Raven, who was standing next to his bald teammate, turned to look at him. Just as he finished speaking, he unfortunately provoked the Lich. It raised its hand to unleash its dark magic, creating a sharp blade that extended towards the fleeing opponent. Raven's bald teammate was desperately thrashing and crying for help. No, I don't want to die. I don't want to. But before he could finish his words, the blade pierced through his abdomen, killing him instantly. As he fell to the ground, blood splattering everywhere, Raven stood there, turning back to witness the scene. He put on a surprised expression, silently thinking to himself that he had only heard of such things in legends. But this strange shiver definitely felt real here. Thinking of this, Raven Vault turned back to look at the Lich sitting in the chair with dark magic surrounding it. He continued to analyze his thoughts about the strongest form of Lich, something that humans could not see. the ghosts. While analyzing, he suddenly realized that humans cannot see them because they are souls, like the god of death. Suddenly, strong winds began to swirl around Raven. As he unexpectedly glanced back, the side blade of the god of death swept by, aiming to stab him, but he managed to dodge it. At the same moment, Raven evaded the scythe. A voice echoed in his mind, "If that scythe touches you, you will." Remembering this, Raven suddenly snapped back to reality and found himself back in Eren's body. It turned out that everything before was just his recollection. When Raven realized he was in Eren's body, he felt something that made him frown. It turned out that Lich's scythe was about to stab him. Seeing this, Eren Pendragon immediately grabbed his sword with one hand and blocked the scythe's strike. As he blocked the scythe with one hand, his sword, adorned with an emerald, instantly glowed, radiating a strange power. Then, immediately, the light from the emerald on Eren's sword, but inside it was Raven, struck back at Lich. When the powerful blue light shone directly on his face, Lich was instantly hindered and unable to resist. Then Lich vanished, leaving Eren Pendragon still dazed and surprised, kneeling on the ground. Witnessing everything, he showed a look of astonishment, fell silent for a moment, then spoke. "What?" Saying this, Eren Pendragon looked at the sword with the gem he was holding, emitting a shimmering blue light. He continued to ask, "What just happened?" "This sword." But before he could finish his sentence, suddenly from behind, a voice yelled out amid the chaos of the battle. "Hey, stay right there." Hearing this, Eren Pendragon froze, startled. Then when he turned to look, he saw Mark Killian holding another person, looking worried and shouting, "Young master, the soldier suddenly fell dead. What the hell is going on?" As he was speaking, Eren immediately noticed another dark scythe of Lich slowly appearing behind Mark Killian, preparing to launch a silent attack. Recognizing a dire situation, Eren suddenly jolted, then immediately reached out his hand and ran towards Mark Killian. He quickly grabbed the man's arm and pulled him aside to evade the deadly scythe of Lich. Upon seeing Eren, but internally being Raven who was pulling himself into a corner, Mark Killian's expression became confused. He turned to look at him and asked what suddenly happened. While he was pressuring for answers, Eren Pendragon seemed to be deaf to his words, standing in silence, his expression turning anxious and disturbed. Then afterward, Raven continued to worry, biting his teeth tightly in anxiety, thinking, "This is not good." In Eren's mind at that moment, he stood precariously, tilting his face up, imagining the dark purple magic. He continued to think, the existence of the specter is very strange. Those who have never faced them cannot know that they kill them before they even recognize what is happening. Moreover, the specters will not disappear until the sorcerer is killed, and there is not just one of them. Thinking of this, Raven within Eren's heart unconsciously clenched his hand, tightly grasping his sword. He continued to think, if I advance from here, the soldiers will not recognize the shadow, and they will be defeated. At that moment, he turned to look elsewhere and immediately saw his teammates beginning to suffer greatly from the overwhelming numbers of those skeletal monsters. He thought again, if I do not eliminate the Lich, I will be overwhelmed by the countless lost skeletons. Thinking of this, Eren Pendragon looked over at Tada and Kazael, who were trembling in fear, hugging each other and tearfully crying in a corner. They had witnessed the scene of everyone fighting the skeletal monsters around them. Seeing this, he continued to think, Tada and Kazael, who had good night vision, could not find the lake. Seeing everything was hopeless, with no solution in sight, Eren Pendragon furrowed his brow and gritted his teeth in worry, continuing to think and reassure himself. This is not Rakshasa. They are not soldiers I can easily sacrifice. There must be a way to resolve this. Then, while he was deeply worried and lost in thought, a staff with a vibrant green gem appeared from another side. Its entire body emitted a shimmering light, flickering in a beautiful shade of green. At this moment, the one holding it used their foot to stomp the magical staff onto the ground. Immediately, after the power of the emerald green staff was unleashed by its wielder, stomping down hard on the ground, the chaotic battlefield in front of Eren Pendragon's team's tent also trembled. Upon seeing this, the goblin wizard with two exposed fangs and his head completely covered in brown garments began to laugh and said, "Kui." As soon as he finished his laugh, the goblin wizard belonging to the same species as Karta approached from behind, put his arm around Eren Pendragon, and continued to look at the chaotic battle, saying, "It seems it is my turn now, young Master Pendragon." At this moment, seeing this, Eren Pendragon turned his head, silently furrowing his brows and looking up at the giant. When the goblin wizard saw him staring at him in silence, he extended his magical staff and, with a self-satisfied expression, continued to say, "I will lend you my power if you need assistance. This is a special magic gifted to me by the Earth God. Look here." Saying this, the goblin wizard began to cast his Earth God magic from the emerald green staff. As soon as he stomped the magical staff on the ground, vines suddenly erupted from the spot where the goblin wizard and Eren Pendragon stood. They surged forward towards the chaotic battle, much to the astonishment of Eren Pendragon. Immediately, as quick as lightning, the vine-like tendrils wrapped around the wood surged forth, passing by the members of Eren Pendragon's team, heading straight for the group of monsters. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but be taken aback and turned to glance at it. Then, as the vine-like tendrils approached the group of young serpents and skeletal remains, they emanated a powerful green earth magic. When the goblin mage saw that his vine tendrils had reached the target, he grasped his magic staff, which was channeling magical energy, lifted one leg and said, "Off." As soon as he finished his words, the vine tendrils were hastily directed to envelop the group of monsters and hurled them upwards, instantly turning them into a mass of broken bones and flesh. From a distance, standing next to the goblin mage and witnessing this, Eren Pendragon stood silently observing his teammates. At that moment, they looked relieved, freed as they watched the scene of the vine tendrils having sprouted up and completely annihilated the group of monsters. At that moment, in the distance, Eren Pendragon was standing next to the goblin sorcerer, witnessing everything unfold, and he frowned, asking, if you can use magic, then go ahead and do it." Hearing this, it closed its eyes, feeling quite pleased with itself, covering its mouth with its hand while snickering and replying, "Kui, don't be unreasonable. Such powerful spells require a lot of preparation, and they are very tiring." Feeling self-satisfied, the goblin sorcerer turned to smile at Eren Pendragon and continued, "And it's not over yet. Let me bring light to you, young master." Saying that, it raised one hand to control its magic while continuing to tell him, "This is not a spell I can use multiple times, so this is your first and last opportunity." Upon hearing this, Eren Pendragon suddenly frowned and then glanced around, noticing something. The goblin sorcerer was casting its spell of entwining vines that caused them to glow, while continuing to say, "Please search for the lich with this." As soon as he saw this, Eren Pendragon's eyes widened in surprise as he looked ahead. At that moment, the sky shifted to a light purple hue, streaming to the dry forest canopies and up to the rocky cliffs. Suddenly looking up, Eren Pendragon was taken aback, his eyes wide open, his face full of surprise. He quickly grabbed his sword and looked up at the cliff, illuminated by the shimmering green magic from the goblin wizard. At that moment, the lich was standing on the cliff, sensing a powerful magic, and suddenly appeared. Upon seeing it, Eren Pendragon, standing below, immediately called out, "Found it!" The gentle green light from the tree illuminated the surrounding area, allowing Eren's eyes to see the being that had been hiding all this time. He exclaimed, "Found it!" Cradle let out a laugh and said, "Ki, we will find a way to defeat the remaining skeletons." Eren charged forward at high speed. Cradle encouraged from behind, "You take care of the rest, young master." Each skeleton was knocked back and separated. Karda was swinging his mace powerfully, smashing the skeletons in front of him. The eyes of Karda lit up with a mad color of the orc tribe, accompanied by strong breaths and low growls. From afar, Eren's voice echoed, "Karda!" Called back from his bloodlust by Eren's voice, Karda turned towards the sound. Eren shouted, "The lich is up there." Karda's face lit up as he realized something. Karda called to Eren, "Come here," and gestured for him to move towards him. Eren understood and quickly dashed over, jumping into Karda's hands. Karda posed to launch him onto the rock edge. Karda raised his hands, and Eren soared upward in a straight line. He spotted the lich casting his magic on the rock. He fell, positioning his hand to deliver a downward slash from the air. From the hollow skull of the lich, a deep red light blazed. Eren descended with his strike, but the lich used his staff to block Eren's attack. The collision of their weapons created a burst of light at the point of impact. Eren stepped back a few paces after the attack. Before him stood the lich, surrounded by a thick aura of darkness. He questioned, "You want my life, don't you?" He continued to taunt, "Look, I'm right in front of you now." Eren stood tall in front of Lich, majestic and unwavering in the face of the power radiating from him. He glanced back, thinking to himself, "Good, the shadow should appear any moment now." He envisioned his followers fighting below the cliff, telling himself, "With this, only the skeletons will remain on the ground." But he also worried for his soldiers, thinking, "But the soldiers are nearing your limit." He glanced back at Lich, full of determination, thinking, "Let's quickly resolve this." Lich noticed Eren had turned around. A stream of dark power still poured from his eye sockets and all over his body. He struck first, the staff in his hand glowing with an enchanting purple hue, with numerous lightning bolts emanating from it. Not giving him much time, Eren charged at him. Lich's magic had just unleashed countless bony arms rising from the ground. However, these arms were no match for him. He slashed through the arms, obstructing his path to Lich. He raced toward him, with tendrils of purple magical smoke still emanating from his body. He had nearly reached Lich and was preparing to launch an attack. Suddenly, from the darkness, a sharp claw appeared above him and Lich. He looked up, surprised. He threw himself down to avoid the claw that was trying to tear him apart. While dodging, he thought to himself, Damn it, is the ghost back to protect the witch? He rolled to evade the ghost claw and fell back. He muttered to himself, how annoying, I can't carelessly approach anymore. While considering his strategy, he wondered, somehow, I have to separate Lich and the ghost. Lich raised his staff, radiating a stream of purple light. He conjured a fierce flame towards Eren. The flame surged forward as if it wanted to engulf him and surround him. Eren was taken aback by Lich's magic, astonished. Fire. Damn it, it prevents me from retreating if the ghost comes. As if the ghost heard his thoughts, a set of claws suddenly appeared above him. Eren's face was filled with panic, sweat dripping down his face as the ghost claw approached his chest, ready to cut him open. Instantly, the gemstone embedded in his sword blazed with a brilliant green light like the color of the sky. At that moment, he was enveloped and protected by a surrounding green flame. Lich was taken aback by what was happening in front of him. He raised his hands to protect his face and stepped back. Eren was enveloped in blue flames. He closed his eyes, feeling the fire. From within the flames came the voice of a mysterious creature, saying, I want to know who you are. Your soul has a different color. Despite that, I am still here waiting for you. Prove that you can reach here, O nameless soul. From the flames, one could see the sharp teeth of a dragon getting closer to Eren's face. His eyes slowly opened, revealing an unusual golden color in his pupils. He called out a name, Soldrake. The blue flames radiated powerfully around him like an aura. He opened his eyes once more, filled with courage and with a pair of wings appearing on both sides of his eyes. Lich summoned a specter to protect him. Eren exclaimed, so that's the specter. The specter took the form of two skulls of two unidentified creatures. Eren could not hide his surprise, saying, this is the first time I've seen them. The ghost let out a threatening roar, revealing its possibly unique flesh, two long black tongues. He plunged a sword into the ground, raising the Pendragon's sword high before him. He swung the sword, sending a wave of green fire towards the ghost. The ghost was hit by the attack and was completely engulfed in flames, letting out a cry of pain. Lich saw his ghost burning and fearfully retreated. Eren's arm emerged from the curtain of fire. He waved his hand, dispersing part of the flames to reveal that he had just walked through the fire. He stepped in front of Lich, his body still ablaze with flames. He thrust a sword straight into Lich's head. The blade pierced through his head, and he affirmed his victory, sending a final farewell of the Lich. It's over, Lich. The blade pierced Lich's head, radiating a triumphant green light. He coldly finished Lich, saying, you end here, Lich. After he spoke, Lich's body blazed at the green fire. Eren glanced at him one last time. The flames gradually dissipated, and so did Lich. What remained was only his cloak and his staff. The magic stone on the staff had cracked. Below the cliff, the entire army of skeletons had collapsed in astonishment to everyone present. Carta voiced a question. What's going on? Why did the skeletons suddenly stop? Cravel replied with a smile. It seems the young master has dealt with the Lich. The skeletons transformed into skeleton soldiers were scattered all over the ground. They began to emit a stream of black gas, which gradually turned to ashes to the amazement of many. Cravel explained with a smile. That's why they have lost their leader. Puffs of ashes drifted skyward toward Eren, who stood majestically on the cliff. He watched the ashes fly with a distant gaze and said, turning to dust and returning to heaven. The scene of the ashes being carried away by the wind toward heaven against the backdrop of a vibrant purple sky and the ivory moonlight further accentuated the victory over the Lich. At this moment, Eren had descended from the cliff. Below the cliff, many warriors had fallen, and the mourning cries of their comrades enveloped the area. Killia was sobbing uncontrollably, his body trembling. Eren turned his face away in another direction. He saw something. These are makeshift graves for the fallen soldiers, and the remaining ones are weeping and praying for them. The sky has turned to night. Eren's army has set up camp to rest. Eren is sitting in a tent somewhere, maintaining his sword when he closes his eyes and slowly drifts off to sleep. A sudden gust of wind sweeps through, causing the cloth resting on the sword to fall. The cloth falls and transforms into a letter, much to Eren's confusion. An image of a young Raven Vault receiving the letter from someone appears. As if watching a documentary, Eren wonders, what are these things? At that moment, the person handing the letter to Raven has his hand on his shoulder. Eren realizes what this is. He speaks up. Is this a memory from that day? The person giving the letter is patting Raven's head, and Raven is smiling brightly. The letter is now lying on the ground. A man with a fierce and angry look points at the letter. At this moment, Raven says, as if to justify himself, you're mistaken, that's not me. He is wearing a bracelet and kneeling on a red carpet before someone of high status, still saying words of justification as before. It's a misunderstanding. I am being falsely accused. Witnessing this scene, Eren cannot bear it and exclaims, stop! The scene now shifts to a rack filled with various torture devices. Hammers, saws, knives, pliers, everything imaginable. It is a torture room, and in the middle of it is a battered raven, his legs shackled to a wooden post, desperately speaking words that he wishes could reach his parents' ears. He says, "I'm sorry, father, mother." His face is bruised and scarred, and the marks from tightly bound ropes can still be seen on his arms. He only has the strength to utter one more phrase. Brother. The vivid images before Eren have strongly moved him once again. He cries out, "Please stop." The scene now depicts a gloomy sky with pouring rain. Raven kneels in front of the gazes of thousands who have come to see him. He wears a large chain around his neck, and his hands are tied behind his back. His eyes are now filled with despair, shedding tears that mix with the rain. That image of Raven resembles Eren from his past, also having desperate eyes filled with tears. Eren is taken aback by the similarity between the two. The scene now shows a small Eren kneeling beside his father's bed, with his mother and sisters behind him. He shouts, "Father, Father, I beg you, please don't die." Raven in Eren's body is witnessing the scenes before him. He recognizes and says, "These memories." Eren in the past is crying dry tears, promising his father, "I will become a dragon knight." Eren holds his father's hand and places it on his face, continuing the promise, "I will become an outstanding member of the Pendragon family, so please." After saying this, he cries loudly, still holding onto his father's large hand. Raven in Eren's body continues the memories of Eren Pendragon. At this moment, Eren wakes up, his face dazed and covered in cold sweat. He is scared, breathing hard after awakening from the nightmare. He grits his teeth, holding his head with his hands. Now he feels very small in his tent. He takes his sword and steps out of the tent. Cradle notices him walking outside. He turns around and asks, while joking, "Are you still awake?" "Young man, it's quite late." Eren looks at Cradle and calls out, "Cradle." He asks, after that, "Are you still on guard?" Cradle calmly replies, "Orcs are very strong, so it's all right. Moreover, if I leave everything to humans, there will be even more sacrifices." Hearing this, Eren turned back to look at the makeshift graves erected for the fallen soldiers today. Cradle yawned, closed his eyes, and said, "That battle was really tough." Eren remained silent for a moment before saying, "This sword has saved me." Cradle opened one eye, looking puzzled. Eren gazed at the sword and continued, "The treasured sword of Pendragon, Widow's Grief." Below the hilt of the sword was an intricately carved image of the dragon Soldrake. He remembered the time he fought the Lich and was surrounded by green flames, saying, "This sword grants me the strength to protect myself from the Reaper's scythe. That is the flame of Soldrake." Cradle asked, "The protective god of the forest?" He focused on the sword, continuing, "This sword possesses the power of Soldrake, and Soldrake has." He recalled the moment Soldrake granted him power and called him by the title, "Oh, Nameless Soul," as if it could recognize he was not truly Eren. At that moment, Eren narrowed his eyes, his gaze thoughtful as he said, "The power to see through everything falls into his eyes." Cradle looked at him with a puzzled and skeptical expression. Eren thought to himself, "White Dragon knows I am not Eren, I am Raven." He clenched his teeth, confused by the continuous visions of Eren's past flashing in his mind. He wondered, but Eren's memories still echoed in his head from the painful screams, "Father, Father," and the desperate pleas, "Please don't die," to the promise to a father who was not his own. "I will become a dragon tamer, and I will become an exceptional member of the Pendragon family." He placed his hand on his forehead, continuing his questioning. "Why am I dreaming about Eren?" Cradle looked at him worriedly and asked, "What happened, Pendragon?" At that moment, Eren clicked his tongue, "Tetch." Cradle flinched and asked in horror, "Why are you angry, my lord? Did I do something wrong?" Eren rubbed his face and apologized to Cradle. "It's nothing, my fault is that I haven't slept enough." Cradle anxiously replied, "Is that so? Then why don't you rest a bit?" Eren bit his lip in silence, not answering Cradle. After a pause, he brushed his hair back and said, "I had a nightmare." Cradle looked at him with a worried expression. Cradle looked into the distance again, his face full of understanding. Cradle said, "I see, the sky is now turned into dawn. The light of the sunrise is breaking through behind the majestic mountains. The peaceful morning scene does not lessen the tense atmosphere." Carta spoke up. "I have a bad feeling," his face full of worry. Killian felt the same. Cradle smiled nervously, seemed to agree. "Hua, I agree. Our chances of safely returning have decreased significantly." Kazel and Tata, beside them, were also trembling in fear. In front of them was a mysterious cave exuding a terrifying, overwhelming aura. Killian said, "The instincts of demons are much stronger than those of humans, so what they sense being here must mean." Eren heard that and added, "There is definitely something here. I fear that it is." Eren looked into the cave ahead, hypothesizing, a tomb. Memories of him as Raven, sitting under the rain and under the gaze of thousands of people, returned to him. Eren gritted his teeth with some anger. He spoke to himself, Surely Soldrake is waiting for Eren. However, I need the power of the dragon to take revenge in the name of the Valk clan, so I must make the dragon obey me. He looked towards the cave, his hand firmly gripping the sword, ready to draw it. Memories rushed back, and with an overwhelming curiosity about what had happened, he was ready to ask his question. What happened to it on that battlefield? His hand drew the sword while continuing his internal dialogue. And then, he remembered the moment he was reborn as Eren and questioned, how was I somehow reborn as Eren? He raised the sword in front of him and slowly drew it from its sheath. As the tip of the sword came out of the sheath, his internal dialogue concluded with the affirmation. The White Dragon must know something about this. He pointed the sword towards the mysterious tomb ahead and declared loudly, "Soldiers, get ready." Carta's strong arm held the torch, illuminating the path ahead. A long line of people moved orderly through the cave, walking steadily behind Carta's guiding light. At that moment, Carta's jaw twitched slightly. Its ears seemed to alert to some signal. Carta raised the torch high and said, "Here." Mark Killian gently wiped his face with his arm and said, "This ability is really amazing." Eren Pendragon slightly curved his lips and replied, "Of course. The senses of an orc can detect the atmosphere and locate sources of water. This ability is essential in our current situation." Suddenly, Cartel's footsteps came to a halt. His unexpected stop made both Carta and Eren Pendragon turn slightly startled at Cartel. Eren, a bit puzzled, asked, "What is it, Cartel?" Cartel did not turn his head, responding softly, "I sense something. Above, they seem to be starting to manifest something." Cartel's gaze lifted, perhaps having already spotted what it was. Eren Pendragon and Mark Killian followed his gaze. Before them, a spirit appeared. The spirits floated in the air. The appearance of the spirit drew the attention of the soldiers following them. At that moment, a waterfall right in front of them roared continuously. Carter raised his torch high to illuminate the surroundings. Cartel focused for a moment and then spoke. "Look, there is a water spirit nearby." Eren Pendragon asked, "Water spirit, are they dangerous?" Cartel continued to look at the ethereal entities, calmly replying, "Not at all. However, this cave has very little life force. It is a special place that the protective hand of the Earth God cannot reach. They should not be here." Eren Pendragon fell into deep thought, his hand reaching up to stroke his chin as if pondering something. Mark Killian speculated and spoke up. Perhaps they cannot get out. But Carta, with the light from the torch, countered. "Behind the waterfall, there is the staircase. Perhaps that is the exit, and there is wind blowing from there too." Suddenly, Eren blinked slightly. Perhaps he had seen something behind the waterfall. Eren Pendragon pointed and said, "There is something glowing in the middle of the waterfall. It looks like a disc." Cartel asked in surprise, "What?" Suddenly, the surface of the water became rippled. It seemed like something was about to surface from there. This sudden change in the water's surface made all of them cautious, ready to fight at any moment. Carta looked at it and he asked in confusion, "What the hell is that?" Even Eren could not identify what was about to appear. It had taken shape, its mouth gaping wide, and its head resembled that of a turtle. Cartel looked at it and softly said, "It's here." The water spirit, the image of a large turtle, gradually became clear, but this turtle was made of water. Eren wondered, "A turtle?" Quickly, Carta replied, "A water turtle." The claws from the turtle's feet emerged. It used its strength to create a powerful wave of water, as if it wanted to attack them. Eren frowned slightly and said, "It's attacking us." But it seemed that Cartel understood the reason behind its actions. It must be trying to protect the treasure. Eren was surprised. "A treasure?" Cartel shifted his gaze and replied, "The object you see in the middle of that waterfall. I have mentioned it before, but there is no protection from the Earth God here. There must be something that causes the water spirits to oppose us." A powerful water turtle rose up, its mouth wide open, ready to drive them away from this place. Eren understood and said, "To protect the treasure, they are trying to crush us." Cartel completely agreed, "Perhaps so." Eren Pendragon became more focused. He was preparing to eliminate it. He tightly gripped the sword in his hand. The water turtle looked fierce, glaring at them. Right after that, Eren Pendragon slowly took the sword and walked straight towards the water turtle. Seeing this, not only Carta but also Mark Killian were startled. He exclaimed, "Wait, wait. Young master, what do you intend to do?" Eren seemed indifferent to his calls. The Duke stood confidently before it, unwavering. At this moment, Eren raised his sword high, speaking softly, "Stay calm." Before Eren, the water turtle opened its mouth wide as if it wanted to do something. Eren's brow furrowed, looking much tenser than before. Once again, Eren repeated, but with a firmer tone, "Stay calm." The blue gem embedded in the center of the sword in Eren's hand suddenly glowed. That source of power caused the old water turtle to quickly turn into harmless droplets of water. Carta and Cartel, standing behind, could not help but observe this powerful and wondrous scene. Eren Pendragon remained unswayed, indifferent to the droplets falling from the turtle's body. The scene around Eren at this moment resembled a downpour of rain. Behind the waterfall, the treasure that the water spirits had been fiercely protecting was slowly becoming clear, something that bore the symbol of House Pendragon. The precious item discovered was a sturdy shield. Mark Killian held the shield in his hands and said with a hint of excitement, "This means that this shield is the treasure." Eren walked ahead with Kartal, while Mark Killian followed behind, still captivated by the newly found shield. What a magnificent shield! It heals the wounds of the bearer and also heals the soldiers, Mark said. Eren casually replied, "Is that so?" Kartal was at the front with Karta, who carried a torch to light their way. Kartal turned back and said to Eren, "That's amazing, my friend. You were able to fend off the water spirits. Is that what you told me about last night? The power of the sorrow of widow's grief." Eren Pendragon did not respond. He simply raised his sword and looked at it, then let out a sigh. Haze. He then said, "I don't understand why anymore. I feel something, and it just keeps happening." Both Karta and Kartal fell silent and sank into deep thought. Kartal looked at Eren's expression and said, "You don't seem to be doing well." Karta, holding a torch, added, "That's just the power of deity, the guardian spirit of the forest." Mark Killian retorted sharply, "What are you talking about? It's all thanks to the Pendragon family." Eren Pendragon silently thought, "That's true." He turned his gaze to the sword in his hand. The power of Soldrake is the power of Pendragon. Simply put, it is not my own power. The image of Ravenvault boldly flashed through Eren Pendragon's mind. Memories flooded back to Eren of his frail father, who was likely about to pass away, along with the cries of his wife and 2 children nearby. "Father, please don't die." Eren Pendragon was in tears at that moment, placing his father's hand on his face, heartbroken and saying, "I will become an outstanding member of the Pendragon clan, so please." Eren did not want to remember those painful memories anymore. He gritted his teeth, wanting to forget them quickly. Eren tightly shut his eyes and thought, "I am Ravenvault." The group followed the path of those steps, leading to a place that looked grand like a castle. This place not only exuded splendor, but also radiated a very special air of mystery. Mark Killian looked at the fortress before him with a serious expression and said, "Finally, I have done it." Eren simply responded with a heem, and the magnificent sight before them was none other than a tomb. In front of the tomb, 2 dragon statues with wings were carved, their gazes clearly reflecting the majesty of the one being worshipped inside. They gradually approached the front of the tomb, feeling an odd sensation. Once again, the sword in Eren's hand began to glow. Mark Killian stood right beside him, and seeing this, exclaimed, "The sacred sword, the cry of widow's grief is." But before he could finish his sentence, Eren Pendragon interjected, "It is crying out." Eren glanced at the sword in his hand, his expression cold, and continued, "That this is the tomb." The sword emitted an increasingly powerful light as if trying to signal. From inside that castle, a hazy mist was emanating. Karta looked in that direction and, feeling a bit excited, said, "Wow, look at the mist rising." Eren's gaze suddenly sharpened as he saw something from the direction of the castle. A figure was gradually becoming clear as it sat confidently on horseback before them. Eren Pendragon stared intently at it and shouted, "Something is coming." But deep down, Eren was thinking, how could this be? From within the hazy mist, the legs and hooves of the horse gradually came into view. A strong and imposing man, riding a horse, clearly displayed the mightiness of a warrior, seemed to appear before them. Karta and Kartal widened their eyes, intently watching the figure that was emerging. Mark Killian stared at the scene before him, taken aback. Gordon. Eren Pendragon raised his sword, his gaze seemed to waver slightly. Eren called out again, "Gordon." The man on the valiant steed appeared before them, but he was not a real living man. He seemed to be a soul, manifesting back. That person was perhaps Gordon Pendragon. The man held the sword in his hand, clad in armor, his face emanating the sharpness of a general. Eren Pendragon, Mark Killian, and Kartal all stood frozen, watching the strange events unfolding before them. Karta stared blankly and murmured, "The former Duke." Mark Killian gasped, "Duke Gordon Pendragon." Eren Pendragon was taken aback to the point of becoming dazed. He observed the man said to be the former Duke before him, with a serious expression, silently thinking, "A transparent body, is it a soul, or perhaps?" Eren's thoughts continued to race. How do I know this man's name? Sudden memories swirled through Eren's mind. He pictured a frail man lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by his wife and 2 children, helplessly crying, "Father, father, don't die." There was again the same image, and those same people appeared in Eren's mind. He gazed off into the distance, but very quickly he grasped everything. So it was Eren's memory. The soul remained strong, riding on the warhorse advancing toward them. A source of light flashed above. The beam of light shot up powerfully into the blue sky. The light shone down, causing them all to raise their hands to shield their eyes from harm, and even Eren had to cry out a few times. He raised his sword high, protecting his head, his face somewhat weary. But Eren's gaze suddenly flickered with something as an entity appeared. The mysterious black shadow of a dragon spread its wings authoritatively under the weak light of the moon at night. Mark Killian and the soldiers accompanying him looked up, wide-eyed in astonishment. Its wings, white as if glowing, spread before them, not only beautiful, but exuding a fierce majesty. Kartal and Karto were also completely captivated by the unfolding events. The white dragon slowly descended closer to the ground. Kazel and Tada looked at this scene in a bit of horror, their mouths stuttering, "Ha ha ha." The gaze of the white dragon was fixed intensely on the group before it. Eren Pendragon also turned his eyes towards it, quietly saying, "It has appeared." The white dragon, pure white in color, flapped its wings, its golden claws sharp and glistening, Soldrake. It flew right above the tomb, slowly descending to the ground. Those dragon talons were close to the soul. Soldrake stopped right in front of that soul. It seemed that Soldrake's appearance was to protect and guard this soul. Mark Killian looked at Soldrake and couldn't help but exclaim, "Beautiful, so beautiful." Kartal and Karta also gazed in rapture, guardian deity. Only Eren was silent, watching without speaking, yet exhibiting no sign of disturbance. Soldrake stood tall, its radiant aura incomparable. Suddenly, a voice rang out, "You, who are you?" This voice startled Eren Pendragon slightly, for he knew that the question was directed at him. The warrior in armor with a sword in hand looked sternly at him, unwavering. Mark Killian, full of horror, said, "D-Do Gordon Pendragon just spoke." Meanwhile, Karta exclaimed, No, that's a demon right. Impossible." Eren Pendragon realized, and he thought to himself, just like that time, memories flooded back from that camp back then. "In the Lac Din Plain, I first met Eren Pendragon." "Who is that?" Eren wondered silently. The previous voice sounded exactly like that voice, which means thoughts continued to race through Eren's mind. The person who spoke that time was the one who is speaking now, not Eren. But Eren also realized it wasn't Gordon. It seemed to be Soldrake. Eren had his own observations. He recognized that this dragon was talking to him. Once again, the voice echoed, "Who are you?" Both Mark Killian and Karta were confused, their gazes slightly directed at Eren. Eren boldly proclaimed, "I am Eren Pendragon." The eyes of the white dragon seemed to waver, its head lowered slightly, moving closer to Eren. Karta, standing right behind Eren, explained, "Wow," while Mark Killian expressed concern by shouting, "Young Master." That voice echoed again, "You are not Eren Pendragon. You cannot deceive me." Eren remained silent, waiting to see what it would do next. The voice came again, "I will ask you one more time. Who are you?" Eren's gaze suddenly wavered. Unconscious memories flashed in his mind. A young man knelt down in a crowded place with a chain around his neck like a condemned prisoner. Someone brave brandished a sword, and the blood caked on it sent shivers down people's spines. A soldier with a fierce face grabbed the young man's hair and yanked him up without any remorse. Those memories surfaced, causing Eren to roar like a wild beast, profoundly affected. He screamed, "Ay!" Eren clutched his head in pain and continued to shout. Mark Killian, full of worry, called out, "Young Master." Eren Pendragon had no idea what was happening to his body anymore. Holding his head tightly, he yelled, my head feels like it's about to crack. I am. What the hell is this? Ah. Eren painfully collapsed right before Soldrake's eyes. White Dragon, slightly confused, leaned closer to Eren to inspect him. Meanwhile, Eren Pendragon remained hunched over, clutching his head in agony. Mark Killian, witnessing this scene, shouted loudly, "Young Master." Karta couldn't stand still either and yelled, "Lord Pendragon." The White Dragon appeared indifferent, its gaze unwavering as it continued to ask, "Who are you?" Eren remained clutching his head, gritting his teeth in pain, continuously screaming, "Ah!" The image flashed again, a boy kneeling among the crowd, utterly pitiable. The chain around his neck only made him look more despondent, tears streaming from his eyes as he looked up at the people staring at him intently. The leader stood opposite him, petting him like a pet in the hands of its owner. Eren furrowed his brow tightly, his mind in great distress. The memories of his suffering kept flooding back. The leading figures wore contemptuous expressions, and their smiles took on an even more sinister edge. He did not want to see them any longer. Those individuals seemed eager to take his life on the spot. The image of the majestic white dragon alongside the Duke stood tall, looking down at the lowly beneath them. But Eren seemed to understand the reason he had to relive these agonizing feelings once more, all because the dragon was making him experience them again. A stream of memories reminded him of the moment when that person grabbed his hair and yanked him up. They looked at him with a contemptuous gaze and a dismissive smile. At this moment, it seemed that the white dragon's gaze had wavered slightly. But Soldrake would not stop until it found its answer. Who are you? Eren could no longer endure what was happening in his mind. He kept holding his head, his lips moving. I am. Eren's eyes twitched once more. Memories surfaced. The gentle gaze of a woman and a man focused on the child being held in their arms. What were those memories? The image of that woman with a joyful expression, who seemed to be the Duke's wife. And the man with a loving smile perhaps was Gordon. So this child, the one being held lovingly by his wife, I am. The innocent smile of the child looking up truly brought a sense of joy to others. The image of Mark Killian in his youth, playing tag with a very cheerful boy, also appeared, but was quickly dismissed by him. No, not that. That memory continued to the moment the golden-haired boy was talking to his sister, seemingly explaining something to her. That was Eren. Once again, the figure of the father on the sick appeared, then the wife, and the two eyes full of tears looking at him. Father, father, please don't die. Blur images kept flooding his mind. The man with the golden hair raised his hand gently, but very quickly, his images also faded through his eyes. The wife and the son of the Duke helplessly knelt by his bed as he took his last breath right there. Indeed, a part of the boy's face appeared. His hand held a paintbrush, slowly painting the portrait of his brave father on horseback, stroke by stroke. He sat alone in that room, his head bowed, facing the painting he had just completed as a memorial for his father's departure. The young man with the golden hair was Eren. He was in deep pain, his brow furrowed tightly, and his teeth clenched hard against each other. Drops of blood spewed from his throat, falling to the ground. Seeing this scene, Mark Killian shouted loudly, "Young master!" At the same time, Kartal and Karta also exclaimed in unison, "Lord Pendragon!" Eren collapsed, lying fully on the ground before the dragon and the spirit. But that voice continued to echo, "Speak your name." Eren's lips moved. "I, Ravenvault." The valiant figure of Eren appeared in every thought segment, then transitioned to the hazy silhouette of Lindsay in his gaze. What? Lindsay's voice called out in Eren's mind, "Young master." The young man, dazed, fused with the stacked memories of his own thoughts. Lindsay. The image of the woman along with her daughter emerged, Eren and Mia. And there was also the image of Helene hugging Eren tightly, sobbing on his shoulder like she had missed him for days. Memories. The moment Eren gently lifted Lindsay's chin while she was blushing profoundly. No, even Kazel and Tada appeared in Eren's memories. They were, one after another. Karta emerged, the moment when Eren and Karta fought each other mercilessly that day. The flag symbolizing a Pendragon house was waved by the soldiers behind him as he joined the battle, moment by moment. His memories. The flow of power from Kartal through the staff he always carries seems to have led Eren to the memories closest to him. The face of the other person appears very clearly, as if standing right before him, smiling at Eren. And the closest memory is perhaps when they, guided by Karta and the torch in his hand, enter the cave. Those images also emerge vividly, appearing one after another like a movie being rewound in Eren's mind. Young master. The calls from those around him seem to pull Eren out of those memories. Hang in there, Pendragon. Mark Killian takes his position as if ready to draw his sword to fight. He shouts loudly, "Protect the young master, even if we have to wager our lives." Karta also cannot remain calm, wanting to rush in. Damn it, there's no other way. But Kartal hastily held him back, saying, "Wait, Karta. Are you planning to oppose the guardian deity?" Karta, not caring much, responded defiantly, "I have fought side by side with him. He is my comrade. If this continues, you will die." Eren seems completely defeated, gasping. Ha! His fingers scratch the ground. Indeed, he slowly forces himself to rise, speaking in a slow tone. "I am." The white dragon lowered its head, seeming to wait. Eren struggled to thrust his sword firmly into the ground. Using the support of the sword, Eren Pendragon managed to sit up, tilting his head to look up at the Soldrake, boldly declaring, "The official heir of the Pendragon territory." He shouted loudly, "Eren Pendragon." The eyes of the Soldrake suddenly wavered. Eren's face was filled with determination, and he was determined not to let himself be subdued by these circumstances. Gordon Pendragon remained mostly unchanged. Gradually, he smiled gently, but right after that, his soul also vanished, leaving only the Soldrake before Eren. Seeing this, Eren thought to himself, "Gordon Pendragon is gone." Suddenly, the white dragon threw its neck back, looking up at the sky. It opened its mouth wide and roared. The Soldrake stood tall as if furious, creating a considerable source of power around them. The nearby soldiers seemed to be blown away. Meanwhile, Kartal also found it difficult to resist the power coming from the Soldrake. Karta covered his ears and shouted, "What?" But it seemed that Soldrake showed no sign of wanting to stop, as Mark Killian was also thrown backward. At this moment, it lowered its head slightly to where Eren was supporting himself against the sword. It whispered softly, "Our promise has been fulfilled, Eren Pendragon and Ravenvault." Eren's face was now smeared with blood, pouring from his nose to his mouth, looking somewhat tragic. It continued, as the one who will inherit the Pendragon line. At this moment, Mark Killian, Kartal, along with Kazal and Tada all rushed towards Eren and shouted, "Young master, you really did it?" The voice of Soldrake echoed, "You Pendragon brat." Eren knelt beside his sword. He knew everyone was filled with worry beside him, so he said, "I'm fine, don't worry." Mark Killian looked slightly confused and asked, "Huh? This is?" Eren then lifted his head a little and replied, "The vow has been fulfilled. I have been chosen by Soldrake." The four of them stood frozen like wax figures upon receiving the news from Eren. But once they realized, they were so overjoyed that they almost cried. They were genuinely happy for Eren. Mark Killian, filled with immense joy, shed tears as he raised his hands high and shouted, "Eren has been chosen. The future of Pendragon is secured." Kartal was somewhat calmer. He said, "From now on, he will accompany the guardian deity. That's a remarkable achievement." Karta also couldn't help but exclaim, "He is the only one who has defeated us." Suddenly, Soldrake lifted its head, seemingly observing something appearing in the sky. Eren Pendragon noticed Soldrake's unusual behavior and looked up as well. But he found nothing, so he turned to ask, "What's wrong, Soldrake?" It replied, "A guest has just arrived." Eren, slightly confused, asked back, "A guest?" His eyes turned toward the sky, where several dark shapes were soaring high above. Perhaps they were flying this way, Eren thought. Could they be birds? But immediately he realized it was not simply birds. Kartal, and even Mark Killian were also taken by surprise. Karta could hardly believe his eyes and exclaimed, "What? No way." And their guest was certainly not birds, but dragons. Karta shouted, "Dragons! Dragons are coming!" 6 dragons appeared at once, flying in a circle above Soldrake and Eren. Eren looked at them in amazement, thinking to himself, "I can't believe it. There are 6 dragons." It was indeed a rare occurrence to see 6 dragons appear at the same time. Quickly, the dragons landed on the ground, forming a circle around them, making them the center point. Kazal and Tona, seeing the dragons surrounding them, couldn't help but feel fear. They trembled, their mouths quivering. Hi. Eren Pendragon also couldn't help but look around. Suddenly, he heard a voice. "Is this the new contract of the Queen?" Hearing the voice made Eren turn around to find out which dragon had just spoken. It was the voice of a dragon, black and mysterious, exuding a sense of power. Soldrake calmly replied, "That's right, Amelhart." Soldrake turned to face the dragons and continued, "I can call you here. Why are you here? The oath to the Pendragon family has nothing to do with you." Another dragon with green scales spoke up, not this time. Soldrake's gaze shifted towards it. Soldrake called its name, Aragurian. Aragurian continued, "We came because this is what we must do." "Don't you know why?" Soldrake asked back, "Do you have the right to question me?" This question silenced the other dragons. Amelhart opened its mouth wide and said, "However, your majesty, in addition to your aura, I also sense something else from this creature. The aura of both a demon god and a dragon god resides within it." Eren realized it was referring to him, but he couldn't fully understand what they were discussing. Soldrake's wings slowly began to flap. It powerfully spread its wings again, creating a violent gust of wind. The soldiers were panic-stricken and swept away by the wind. Wow. The dragons stared at Soldrake, understanding that Soldrake was driving them away. Soldrake stood across from Amelhart with a stern look, in the midst of which was the somewhat small presence of Eren Pendragon. Soldrake spoke, "Uninvited guests, get out of my territory at once. In the name of the King of Dragons, I command you." By invoking this name, it was clear that he truly did not want to see the presence of these uninvited guests any longer. Eren turned his head to look at him, his expression a mix of surprise and disbelief. Soldrake, the King of Dragons. The dragons appeared a bit apprehensive, glancing at one another. A pair of wings had spread out, perhaps they were preparing to leave. Amelhart spread his wings wide, facing Soldrake one last time. Both seemed tense, but in the end, he still had to speak up. Let today be it. However, he didn't forget to add firmly, "If one day this human returns to our lands, then everything will become clear." From beginning to end, Eren remained silent, observing and listening to their conversation while contemplating silently. Amelhart then spread his wings. Just like the way they had all appeared at once, now all 6 dragons departed together at the same time. They transformed once again into black shadows, gradually fading into the high sky. Karta sat on the ground, bewilderedly asking, "What just happened?" Tada spoke up, "It's like you're talking to each other." Karta replied, "No one can hear the dragons' voices except the one who's talking to them. Before the oath was established, we heard their voices through Gordon, but now we can't hear anything." Hearing this from Kartal, Eren raised his hand to his chin. He fell into deep thought, pondering alone, am I the only one who heard their conversation? But Soldrake's voice really did stop after the oath was made. Putting that aside, there are 6 dragons, a dragon god, and a demon god. Damn, I still don't know too much. Although I heard the entire conversation, Eren's understanding remained limited. He couldn't fully grasp what they had been saying to each other all this time. Eren Pendragon looked up at Soldrake. Perhaps it knows everything. Soldrake, the king of dragons, stands majestically under the moonlight, truly exuding the presence of a king. The reason I was reborn as Eren. Eren furrowed his brow, his eyes lost in thought. He called out, Soldrake, I have something to ask. Eren raised his hand to signal, could you lower your head a bit? Look, my neck is killing me. Soldrake glanced at Eren. It spoke, if that's the case, there's a better way. No one knew what it was about to do. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Around Soldrake, a strange light radiated, making its body even more ethereal. Mark Killian looked at the scene before him and exclaimed in astonishment, what? Soldrake has vanished. A blinding source of light emanated from Soldrake's position. Eren couldn't help but quickly raise his arm to shield his eyes. When he noticed the light had softened somewhat, he slowly lowered his arm. However, Eren couldn't see Soldrake anymore. He felt a bit frustrated and shouted, hey, Soldrake. But Eren heard Soldrake's voice, where are you looking? At that moment, Eren was a bit startled. Ha! Behind a stream of blue light, a pair of legs wearing high heels gradually appeared. Soldrake, in the form of a dragon they had just seen, had now transformed into a human, with still a pair of wings on its shoulders, platinum hair, and beautiful outfit and appearance. Quickly, Soldrake stood before Eren in human form. With 3 gems embedded on its forehead and cold blue eyes, Soldrake said, I am right here. Soldrake's appearance at that moment left Eren Pendragon, Kartal, and even Mark Killian astonished to the point of wide-eyed disbelief. Just moments ago, it was a dragon and now it had turned into a human. In this human version, Soldrake possessed an incredibly beautiful, voluptuous, and even somewhat alluring body. Behind Soldrake were still a pair of white wings, along with a smooth white back. Soldrake stood before them, bearing a demeanor that was both relaxed and radiating pure elegance. Once everything was settled, it finally spoke to Eren. You said you had something to discuss, so let's continue our conversation. Faced with Soldrake's rapid transformation, everyone was astonished and speechless. They couldn't believe that the majestic Soldrake, white dragon before them, had now become a human. The horse's footsteps moved slowly along the road. Eren Pendragon looked impressive, sitting comfortably on the saddle. Below him was Soldrake, and behind him were Mark Killian, Karta, and Kartal, along with a line of soldiers following behind. Karta turned to Mark Killian and said, Hey, that human over there. Can I ask you something? What are they talking about? Mark Killian turned his head back and replied casually, Why are you asking me about that? If you want to know, just go ask them yourself. Karta looked towards them. Kartal spoke up. Approaching the guardian deity is not easy for Ancona orcs like us. Mark Killian added, even if you could, you wouldn't be able to hear what they are saying. They looked towards Soldrake and said, we can't hear Soldrake's voice. Then we looked at Eren sitting on horseback, and for some reason, we can't hear the young master's voice either. Mark Killian placed his hand on his chin, rubbed it thoughtfully, and said, but I have never heard of dragons turning into humans. Eren Pendragon rode parallel to Soldrake. Although we couldn't hear what they were saying, it seemed they were discussing many things. Mark Killian, gazing at Soldrake with a somewhat enamored expression, exclaimed, and he is so beautiful as well. Karta, lacking an eye for aesthetics, said, really? Orcs like us don't see it that way at all. Soldrake's blue eyes possessed a special kind of power. If those eyes were to look at you, your body would freeze in fear. Eren reached out, his eyes always directed towards Soldrake to converse. He asked, who are those 6 dragons? They seem displeased with our oath. What are they opposing? Soldrake became somewhat subdued, responding, this is something that only time can affirm. Eren suddenly fell silent. But right after that, the guy continued. You showed me the past when I was still Raven, so you surely know about the inexplicable deaths of you and Eren. Furthermore, about what Baltai said, you must know something about them, the reason I was resurrected as Eren, a Raven soul in Eren's body. And right now, perhaps Raven has truly become Eren, fully taking on the missions that Eren carries. But Soldrake seemed unwilling to reveal anything. It said, time will give you the answers. Eren Pendragon squinted, his eyebrows tightly knitted together. Suddenly, Eren pointed directly at Soldrake's face and shouted, hey, you've only said that so far. Tell me everything I need to know. Soldrake remained unfazed, calmly replying, you talk too much. It continued to explain, members of the Pendragon family rarely wish to speak with me. Upon hearing this, Eren Pendragon could only remain silent, as he probably knew that no matter what else he asked, the answers would be much different. Eren raised his hand to touch his forehead, a bit irritated, silently thinking, what's wrong with her? I thought that just swearing allegiance to her would finally allow you to know something. Eren didn't even know how to dig out the information he wanted when suddenly something made his body react. A demon with a gaping mouth and sharp teeth appeared out of nowhere, wanting to attack Eren Pendragon. Mark Killian jumped in surprise and exclaimed, "A demon!" Meanwhile, Karada also couldn't help but say in horror, "It's too big." But Eren showed no signs of fear or hesitation. He quickly grasped the hilt of his sword, ready to charge into battle against it. Contrary to everyone's expectations, before Eren could rush in, Soldrake darted forward like a gust of wind. She attacked head-on, piercing through its body and aiming straight for its heart. Mark Killian and Karada were both astounded by Soldrake's speed and attacking power. Not only them, but Eren was also wide-eyed, somewhat impressed by the scene. Seeing the demon's head being mercilessly severed by Soldrake, its speed was so great that it couldn't even react in time. Eren thought to himself, "So fast." Soldrake's hand grasped a piece of bright red meat, still dripping with blood. She gazed at the red meat in her hand. Moments later, she casually brought it to her mouth. This sight sent chills down the spines of the soldiers, including Kazal and Tada. Tada said softly, "She really is a dragon." Mark Killian seemed to have lost the image of Soldrake's beauty from earlier. He remarked, "Even in that form, she doesn't look human at all. She is beautiful indeed." However, what she possessed was nothing like human beauty. Although Soldrake might currently be in the shape of a human, the truth is that she forever belongs to the dragon race. All of her instincts and actions are those of a dragon. Eren watched this unfold, unsure of what to say, remaining silent as he observed from a distance. Eren's troops set up camp in the evening to rest. The deep red tents were erected, bearing the emblem of the Pendragon clan. Soldrake sat on a tree trunk, gazing at the night sky. Suddenly, she heard someone calling her name, prompting her to look down. It was Eren, holding a sheep he had just hunted. At that moment, he had removed his heavy armor, and he was left wearing a rather thin black outfit. Eren drove the sword into his stomach, slowly slicing off its meat to prepare dinner. Quickly, some ribs were brought out to roast over the fire, looking quite appealing. Eren took a few and began to roast them slowly. The pieces of meat were cooking over the red flames, likely ready to eat soon. When the meat was fully cooked, Eren held it out to Soldrake and said, "Here, this might be the first time a dragon like Soldrake has eaten grilled meat like this." He said, "If you are in human form, you should eat like this." Eren took a bite and slowly guided her on how to eat gently. Soldrake watched how Eren ate. Then she took her piece of meat and gently bit into it. She took a bite, then looked up at the high sky. She turned to Eren and said, "You are indeed an interesting Pendragon." Eren replied slowly, "I am a Pendragon, however. I am also a raven." Soldrake remained silent, just staring at him. In the quiet depths of the forest, suddenly a bird flew out from the tree, making quite a noise. Perhaps it was that very bird that shattered the peaceful atmosphere between the two of them. Eren blinked and said, "I will not talk about myself anymore. You wouldn't understand anyway." The guy smiled slightly with a faint curve of his lips. "I used to do this very often. Not bad, right?" Soldrake looked at that smile in silence, her eyes wide open, gazing at him passionately. "By the way, I have something I want to ask you," Eren said. But before he could finish asking, she interrupted Sol. Eren was a bit confused, but Soldrake smiled gently and said, "From now on, you can call me Sol." Eren was astonished, his eyes widened as he looked at her, thinking inwardly. She just smiled. Eren also chuckled slightly. "So dragons can smile too?" Haha. So Sol, about the dragon god and the demon god. Before Eren could finish his question, Soldrake replied, "Time will answer that for you." In the cold silence of the night in the mountains, Eren's frustrated shout echoed, "Hey!" Countless servants lined up to welcome Eren's return. He was back with the dragon. Helene, along with Aria, was carrying her daughter Maya in her arms, hurrying towards the balcony of the palace to wait. With them was Lindsay as well. Aria exclaimed with joy, "Finally you did it, brother." Mrs. Helene gently raised her hand to wipe her eyes, smiling and saying, "You are truly a pride of mine, my son." Lindsay sighed in relief upon seeing Eren safe. "When I bid him farewell at the Barento gates, I was really worried, but thankfully he is fine. He has returned." Eren sat proudly on his horse, returning majestically. Below him were continuous applause and cheers. Duke, Lord Eren. The army led by Eren returned amidst the adoration of the crowd. Everyone welcomed them very warmly. From above, Lindsay and Aria looked somewhat surprised. Who is that?" Meanwhile, Kazal and Tada seemed very excited by the warm welcome from everyone. They each said, "I am Kazal. Wow, there are so many people." Karta and Kartal were also a bit enthusiastic. Kartal looked around and said, "Ha ha ha, it's really lively." At this moment, Soldrake spread his wings and soared high above. Melvin was surprised to see what was happening. Goblins, harpies, and even orcs Why were these monsters here? And who was that winged woman? Helene gasped in astonishment. That woman. Eren shouted, "Everyone!" The guy confidently drew his sword from its sheath and proclaimed loudly, "Pendragon has triumphed. Today, the dragon will be with us once again." Lindsay and Arya were both somewhat confused. The 3 stones embedded in Soldrake's forehead suddenly began to glow. She spread her wings wide and ascended into the sky. A powerful light appeared, surprising everyone present. Lindsay, Arya, and Mia all focused intently on what would happen. The jaws of Soldrake gradually became visible. Soldrake opened its mouth wide, and in the blink of an eye, the girl transformed back into her strong white dragon form. It soared high, capturing everyone's gaze. Soldrake, let's celebrate! The army slowly entered the city. The return of Soldrake was a joy for the entire tribe. Beautiful fireworks were launched into the sky, creating a magnificent night scene. The noble lords donned their majestic robes and participated in this celebratory feast. They chatted happily and energetically with each other. The musician sitting by the piano was passionately playing a tune, causing them to become completely immersed in it. Another man holding a mandolin also drew a crowd, enticing many to listen to the music he was playing. Lindsay sat at the table, watching everyone enjoy the party. She said, "This is quite a lavish feast. It's the first time I've participated in such a party." Eren smiled brightly and replied, "This party is to celebrate the treaty between the White Dragon and my brother." The lords of the surrounding regions and influential merchants were all in attendance. Wow, Lindsay turned her head in search. Where is the heir? On this side, Eren was standing by the window, while Soldrake was seated by the ledge, gazing at the scenery below. The young man, clad in royal robes, said, "Don't you want to join the party, Sol?" Soldrake turned his head slightly and replied, "Huh? Whether you are Eren or Raven, don't you think you've talked to me enough already?" Eren helplessly thought, even though he didn't understand anything. Soldrake continued to speak. "Moreover, as the heir of the Pendragon family, you should be busy at the party, right?" Eren Pendragon sighed and replied, Greeting the guests is quite a hassle. I suppose you know a lot about human society." Eren also sat down right next to Soldrake, but he turned inward. She said, "I have been accompanying the Pendragon family for a long time, but I have never heard of a dragon attending a party before." Eren countered, "Why not, even if you can transform into human form?" Soldrake turned her head to look at him in confusion. Eren merely hummed in response. She spoke up, "Just as I thought, you are indeed very different from the previous Pendragons." But right after that, she spread her wings and flew away, regardless of Eren's call from behind. Hey. Very quickly, Soldrake became just a dark shadow in the sky, seen through the window from Eren's perspective. He couldn't do anything else but remain silent, watching her gradually disappear. But something caught Eren Pendragon's eye and made him glance over. At the same time, several women in luxurious dresses, their faces filled with excitement, approached Eren and said, "So this is where you are, Duke Eren. We want to hear the story of how you made the pact with the dragon." Their voices were high-pitched, as if trying to impress Eren. Seeing a crowd of women approaching made Eren frown tightly. He was about to break into a sweat. Outside the party, Lindsay was serving food to a distinguished guest. She smiled and said, "I apologize for the delay." He looked at her affectionately, holding a glass of wine, and said, "Your body is beautiful. Would you like to be my lady?" Lindsay laughed awkwardly. "Ha ha." In another direction, a woman's voice rang out, "Wow, that's wonderful." Lindsay turned to see Eren surrounded by a group of women, their chatter incessant. "Ha ha." A girl in a red dress introduced herself. "I am Crescentia of the Papulsupu clan. I inherit the pure blood of the first emperor and am one of the most distinguished families." A girl with shimmering blonde hair waved her hand and said, "My name is Mabel. I have a connection with the Jodenson commercial department, and I am a member of the Goldman family." The girl in the red dress yelled out loudly, "Hey, you aren't even nobility. You're just a merchant." The girl confidently raised her hand adorned with dazzling rings. Around her neck hung a necklace with sparkling stones. "Oh, didn't you know? The Goldman family is single-handedly shouldering the entire economy of the empire. I don't know if your family can sell such mithril jewelry." The girl in the red dress scoffed disdainfully. "Stop bragging, you nouveau riche." Meanwhile, the blonde girl smirked. "I'm laughing in your face, you outdated old lady." Eren frowned tiredly at the bickering of these annoying women. He shoved his hands in his pockets and quietly stepped out of the crowd of girls. Lindsay found this somewhat confusing. Eren thought to himself, all these people want to shake hands with me. I can't let that bother me. Suddenly, Carter's voice rang out, "Hey, you weakling." He is holding a beer cup and drinking with another person. Carter patted him on the shoulder and said, "Have you already passed out after just 10 cups? The other person slumped over the table, tiredly replied, "How can I compare to an orc?" Under the drinking table, Kartel and Kazael were playing with Maya. The girl looked at her stuffed rabbit moving and suddenly exclaimed, "Wow, the rabbit is moving." Kartal smiled lightly and replied, "That is called the little Pendragon magic." Eren turned his gaze toward them. Immediately, Karta called out, "Yo, Pendragon, come drink with us. Show me human stubbornness." The other person hurriedly spoke up, "You fool, the young master is very busy." Eren Pendragon smiled slightly. Eren walked over, gently rubbing Maya's head, and said, "Are you all right? We can't let you drink alone." Karta triumphantly pointed at Kartal and said, "Haha," he accepted. From a distance, Lindsay was watching everything. She seemed a bit shy while Eren's table shouted, "Let's start." Eren sat at the table with Karta, raising his cup to drink just as much. At the castle of the Pendragon clan, Eren Pendragon, after having drunk quite a bit of wine, groaned with a slight headache. "Up my head." Lindsay was supporting him, walking slowly. She asked with great concern, "Are you all right, young master?" Eren replied, "I'm sorry for bothering you, Lindsay," but she just smiled and said, "It's fine. It's been a long time since I've seen you this happy that your father passed away, so I'm happy too." Eren calmly said, "Is that so?" He asked further, "By the way, what is my mother doing? It's quite late." Lindsay replied, "Oh, I thought the tradition was..." The doors swung open wide. A voice called out, "Come in." 10 girls lined up in 2 deep rows, standing straight, smiling gently as they awaited the appearance of the young man. The girl with red hair glanced at Eren and winked flirtatiously. Meanwhile, the one with the blonde hair wasn't to be outdone and smiled softly at him. Eren was utterly confused by the scene before him. "Is this..." Mrs. Helene spoke up and asked, "Is there anyone among them that you fancy?" Eren exclaimed, "Mom." But she continued, "Since you have made a pact with a dragon, you also need to have an heir. That is the responsibility of a Pendragon. Now choose, who among them will you have a child with?" Eren frowned, his face tense. A loud voice emanated from inside the castle. "What?